My wife cheated and called it an open marriage, so I took my money, divorced her, and walked away. Penelope, or Penny as I always called her, and I have been married for 28 years. Our 28th year marked both an ending and a beginning. It was the year our youngest child headed off to college, officially making us empty nesters. I saw this as an opportunity to rekindle Penny and my personal life, which had suffered during our marriage, mainly due to lack of energy and privacy. Being working class, we live in a small house with thin walls, not a grand mansion with nannies and maids. I thought everything was going according to plan, and my plan would succeed once we got home. Despite Penny's protests about her sore rear after the trip, I insisted she let me take a shower first. Then I made love to her. She seemed to enjoy it, and I hoped it was a preview of things to come. Even at 48, she still aroused me like a pervert, and I was still passionately in love with her. Penny is a nurse and was in training when we met. Between raising our children and the constraints of time and money, she remained a general nurse. Over the years, she often lamented seeing younger nurses come in, quickly advancing while she stayed stagnant. To say she was outraged would be an understatement. After some impressive closeness, Penny revealed her well-thought-out plan. She explained there's a chronic shortage of pediatric nurses at her hospital. A 6-month intensive training course would allow her to stay employed there, with the head nurse of another department retiring in 2 years. Penny could apply for that position. Then in 5 years, she could vie for the matron position at her current hospital. This was Penny's ultimate goal. She'd researched it thoroughly and found out she could be paid during training, easing the burden on our income. Her increased salary would help us reach our retirement goal at 60. I was amazed by Penny's newfound ambition. It felt like I was seeing her for the first time, both scary and thrilling. But as I pondered why she hadn't shared her plans sooner, the reason for her reticence became clear. The only place Penny could take this course was in another state, and a $250 flight away. 6 months, it's been a long time. Penny, is there anything closer? I asked. They don't offer an online course? She replied. No, they don't offer it, and it's not such a long time. Time will fly by. During the war, couples did this all the time. Hell, they got by with just letters for years. And of course, we can afford for you to fly in once a month. I remained silent, pondering questions and answers in my mind. Before I could voice any objections or ask further questions, Penny erupted angrily. Jesus, Mike, don't be so arrogant. I winced. I've never been arrogant. Not with her, not with our daughters. I was so offended that I almost missed the rest of her outburst. If it was about you and your career, the whole damn world would expect support and encouragement from me. But since I am a woman, you think that I am selfish for wanting you to support me in my dream. Or selfish. When did I even have the opportunity to make such an accusation? I barely had a chance to get a word in edgewise. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to remain calm. Anger will not lead to anything good. Pen, I'm not selfish, and I don't blame you for it. Just trying to figure things out. You've clearly thought a lot about this for a long period of time, while I only had 10 minutes, I said. Penny immediately assumed a tone of remorse, explaining further. Housing student nurses and working in a teaching hospital will keep the depletion of our pension funds to a minimum. Flying Penny back home for 6 months probably wouldn't be practical, given how busy she would be. But it would be possible for me to fly her over once a month or so to spend a weekend together. It all sounded pretty reasonable, but the gap between my immediate future plans and Penny's was confusing, and in hindsight, I think it made me vulnerable. Penny began nibbling on my ear, initiating a welcome second round and effectively forcing me to swallow any remaining questions I might have asked. Any physically starved guy in such circumstances will agree to almost anything, I thought. So, I agreed for Penny to attend the next course. The last bomb exploded as she hurriedly climbed aboard. The course began the following week. After that, my well-thought-out questions meant nothing. You already agreed, remember? She reminded me. I felt like I was being manipulated. Penny left after a flurry of activities, looking like a child going to her first camp. She was so excited that she barely remembered to kiss me goodbye. I'm ashamed to admit, but I had a hard time adjusting to the new daily routine. For many years, I didn't have to think about what I would do in my free time. I'm guilty of leaving the planning of our social life to Penny. As long as she made time for my side of the family, I was content with her being in charge of that aspect of our lives. I know I'm not alone in this, as most of the guys I work with do the same. Most of Penny's evenings and weekends, excluding the children, were filled with activities that she organized and devoted to us. Or I attended to necessary chores like mowing the lawn, washing cars, and shuttling the children to and from sporting events. Now, from 6 in the evening when I returned home from work until 10 or 11 at night, I found myself feeling lonely and bored. It's not that I was accustomed to going out all the time because we never did, but now there was no one to chat with when the newscaster reported yet another foolish blunder by one of our politicians, or to share laughs and hold hands while watching our favorite shows. I even missed Penny rubbing her feet. During Penny's first week away, our evening talks lasted for 30 minutes. I couldn't help but wonder if she had factored in our increasing phone bill when planning and budgeting. I also couldn't shake off a twinge of jealousy. She seemed busy and thoroughly engaged in her new challenge. She dominated our conversations, sharing all her news. Her excitement was palpable. The names of unfamiliar people she mentioned made me feel excluded, like I had no place in her life at this moment. Yet, our conversations always ended on a positive note, giving me hope. Maybe her absence would strengthen our bond, and when she returned, we could pick up where we left off with our carnal life. By the second week, our evening chats dwindled to 20 minutes, as Penny claimed she needed to focus on her studies, and our talks were disrupting her nursing mindset. It stung. I felt reduced to an intrusive conversationalist. I made an effort to always conclude our discussions affectionately, but by the end of the week it began to feel somewhat one-sided. Though I tried to remain supportive and encouraging, keeping my frustrations and loneliness to myself, in the third week she proposed that we call only every other evening. And oddly enough, she suggested she call me instead of the other way around. She said it would prevent her from being distracted at inconvenient times. By the fourth week, I received only 2 calls. I tried to be understanding. She had a significant assignment and was working the evening shift, but it was tough. I looked forward to flying to her on the weekend. I missed her, missed us. However, fate intervened. My planned trip had to be canceled last minute because Penny informed me of a flu outbreak overwhelming the hospital with patients. In that teaching hospital, everyone was working flat out. Yet, the weekend didn't go to waste entirely. While refueling, I ran into an old friend with whom I had drifted apart over the years. He and his buddies played poker every Saturday night at the local pub. He invited me along, and feeling tired of being idle and forgotten by my wife, I accepted. The company was enjoyable. We played a few casual games in the back room before heading to the bar for some relaxing drinks. After years of my social life revolving around neighborhood barbecues, cozy family-style bistros, and kid-friendly events, the pub was a revelation. I was surprised by the number of single women my age, or slightly younger, who confidently approached me and frankly tried to flirt. It's funny how, after years of marital contentment and child-rearing, you forget that these encounters happen in bars. It took 3 Saturdays and I'll admit several other weekdays when it became clear that Penny wouldn't call that evening before the pattern became too frequent to dismiss as a coincidence. I asked my buddy Jeff for insight. "Mike, you're way off base, aren't you? Haven't you noticed that at our age there are noticeably more single women than single men? What you're seeing are widows, left for a younger model, abandoned due to a midlife crisis, or deceived by cheaters." "Why me?" I questioned. "Come on, Mike. You've been married so long that your self-assurance as a man is closely linked to what your wife thinks and says. Look in the mirror, and then look around you, buddy. You're more attractive than most, and thanks to your physical labor, you're still fit and muscular. You're not dodging a wife with a weapon, and you're not stuck at home with the kids. Buddy, if you took off your wedding ring, you'd have someone within 2 hours without resorting to chat lines or buying drinks." I surveyed the room, noticing more than one interested glance. Jeff followed my gaze. "I don't want to cheat on Penny, Jeff." "I get that, but let's say you're on the market. I'd advise not being too aggressive. These women are out to snag a man tonight. Hell, hate to say it, but I reckon half of them are married and looking for a fling, just like half the guys here. Now look over there." Jeff gestured to a table where a despondent-looking woman in her 40s sat with 5 friends. She's probably just been traded in for a younger model, and now her friends are consoling her. Give her a few weeks, she'll be back looking for a hookup to prove she's still got it, and blame it all on her ex. If you're after a quick fling, come back then. Or next time, don't flash your wedding ring when one of the cougars comes over. It all depends on what you want. For something more lasting, check out that table." Jeff pointed to a group of women around my age, laughing and enjoying themselves. "Looks like 2 are married, 2 aren't. 3 of them are scoping the room. That's where I'd aim if I were single. A bunch of co-workers having fun together. 2 are hitched, but that doesn't stop 1. The other 2 are lonely but not desperate. They might seize an opportunity, but they're not actively seeking it." Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Penny, apologizing for being too busy to call. I tried to appreciate the gesture, but it was hard, as her calls and texts grew fewer. At least she remembered to sign off with "love you" better than her last few messages. I replied with a quick "love you too" before turning back to Jeff. Okay, I'll prove my point. Take off your ring, then head over to the part of the bar nearest that table and order a drink, he urged. I followed his advice, leaning against the counter, watching discreetly. Within a minute of resting my elbows on the table, one of the married women sprang up, slipping her ring into her pocket. She boldly offered to buy me a drink, but lost interest when I mentioned my marriage. I couldn't resist pointing out that I'd seen her remove her wedding ring. She blushed, somewhat embarrassed. The others at her table observed as one of the single women approached me just as the bartender took my order. She waited for my drink to arrive before placing her own order. Glancing back at their table, I noticed their glasses were mostly filled, so it wasn't surprising when my new acquaintance at the bar greeted me and initiated a polite chat. A quick assessment told me she wasn't quite my type, and my body language must have given me away because she soon returned to her friends with a round of drinks. Sipping my drink, I awaited Jeff's return from the restroom to confirm his insight when I heard a soft hello behind me. Turning around, I found the second single lady from their table confidently looking at me. With my newfound understanding of the situation, I sensed she was creating an opportunity, but wouldn't be upset if it didn't pan out. If I were single, she would definitely catch my interest. It was hard to gauge her age. She could be my age or slightly younger. Attractive, slender, but not overly so, with soft, honey-colored hair framing her face in a genuine smile. Glancing at her ring finger and then mine, I noted neither of us bore any untanned marks indicating infrequent ring wearing due to our respective jobs. Custom dictated I offer her a drink, but she declined, opting to sip her own instead. There was a confidence in her demeanor that I found appealing. Clearly, she was comfortable in her own skin. We engaged in casual conversation about various topics. 10 minutes later, I confessed I was married, despite the absence of a ring. I could have concocted a lie about its whereabouts, but something compelled me to be entirely honest with Andrea, as I learned her name was. She questioned my behavior, initially interpreting it as deceitful. Well, in my defense, one of your friends approached me not 20 minutes ago. She was so forthright that she removed her rings without hesitation. This is Carol. She's not exactly my friend. We just met tonight. She's here with Sue, who is my friend. They used to work together. Honestly, it was surprising to see her here. It's a bit sad for her husband, don't you think? I nodded in agreement. I took mine off not to have fun, but to test my buddy Jeff's theory about why women are age-frequent bars, I explained, laughing at the detailed account of Jeff's theory. Mostly she concurred with him. Our conversation then turned to Penny. My wife has been away on a 6-month course out of state for almost 2 months now, and I hate to admit it, but I feel kind of lost without her. You must miss her, Andrea empathized. Very much. She's busy with work and study. We hardly get to talk. That's why I'm here. Tired of sitting alone and staring at the walls of our living room, I admitted. So you're just seeking companionship? No hookups or one-night stands? Andrea's direct question took me aback slightly. No, I'm monogamous, but that doesn't mean I can't enjoy female company and conversation. Andrea nodded approvingly. Well then, let's continue our conversation. Talking to Andrea was effortless. She recounted how she and her husband had invested heavily in their children as they grew up, to the point that when the nest emptied, they felt like strangers. 6 months ago, they decided to part ways amicably, and Andrea relished her newfound freedom. However, she didn't rule out the possibility of a relationship if the right guy came along. Our conversations stretched on for over an hour. Eventually, it became apparent that her friends were leaving. I noticed Andrea debating whether to stay or go, but ultimately she opted to depart. I took her consideration of staying as a compliment, knowing there was no potential for a relationship with me. She must have simply enjoyed our company and conversation. Compared to Penny's rejections, this interaction was refreshing. Penny's phone calls became even rarer and shorter. We spoke for 5 to 10 minutes twice a week. I consciously adopted a new, more relaxed attitude toward life, partly to maintain my sanity. There's no use in fighting it. Penny isn't interested. A couple of times when I mentioned the declining calls, she accused me of being childish and trying to make her life difficult with my persistence. Doesn't she understand we're in the same boat? Doesn't she have enough on her plate without my complaints? My protest that I wasn't complaining but simply stating facts went unheeded, and as punishment, I didn't hear from her for 5 days. Refusing to dwell in unhappiness and tired of feeling frustrated and powerless at Penny's whim, I began frequenting the bar several times a week just to socialize. My visit to Penny the following weekend was inconvenient as she had assignments. It was painful. We'd been apart for 10 weeks, and I felt like I wasn't a priority to her. She made no effort to carve out time for me, for us. During our last 3 conversations, she didn't even bother to inquire about my activities. When the following week she announced she was having a tough time with her periods and wasn't in the mood to talk, I wasn't surprised. The next evening, breaking protocol, I called her cell phone. One of her roommates answered, informing me Penny had taken sleeping pills and retired early, leaving her phone with her friend for peace of mind. Meanwhile, I found solace in my social life, which proved more fulfilling than waiting at home for phone calls that never came. The absence of calls left me feeling like a lovesick teenager pining by the phone. I joined the Thursday night darts competition when one team needed a player, and I unexpectedly enjoyed the Tuesday night trivia quizzes. I met intriguing people of both genders, always making it clear to single women that I was married and not interested in cheating. Andrea often approached for a chat when she was with her friends. She began spending time with a guy and deemed him interesting enough for a relationship. However, it only lasted 2 weeks before he vanished. She confided that she couldn't handle his intense focus on physical engagement, and he left. This suited her. It didn't pass the seriousness test. We made a point to avoid deep discussions about Penny and my relationship, and Andrea never offered her opinion on Penny's behavior, which suited me fine. I was resentful toward my wife and her disregard for me. We went 14 weeks without seeing each other, and phone calls remained scarce and brief. Even worse, our conversations felt like an imposition on her. Sure, she had taken on the challenging task of balancing work and school, but did that mean I should be neglected? Forgotten like old, worn-out shoes? Could regular brief conversations and texting really hinder her goals that much? The more time I spent with Andrea, the more I appreciated her warmth, friendliness, humor, and intelligence. I even enjoyed helping her, feeling useful when she needed support at the bar. I'd wait for her signal when she wasn't interested in someone, but found it difficult to leave. When she signaled, I'd approach, kiss her on the cheek, and deter the guy. Then I'd chat with Andrea until he left. What troubled me was how eagerly I looked forward to talking to her. She was a great conversationalist. We'd engage in discussions, nothing flirtatious, unless debating Pepsi versus Coca-Cola counts. Despite there being nothing inappropriate, I couldn't deny feeling disappointed if I didn't see her in my evenings. For the first time, I understood how someone could be seduced into an affair. Suddenly, cliches like "my wife doesn't understand me" or "my wife ignores me" made sense. I don't condone cheating, but I gained a new understanding of how it happens. The temptation was strong, a situation I never expected to find myself in. With each passing day, my resistance weakened. So far, I had refrained from any inappropriate actions with Andrea, but I wasn't a saint. With constant reminders of Penny's indifference, I didn't know how much longer I could resist. I wondered if Penny felt the same way, but quickly dismissed the thought. She's too preoccupied with work and school to miss me or pursue another man. However, halfway through her training course, I knew I had to act, or our marriage would suffer irreparable damage long before the 6 months were up, and I'd become something I never thought I was capable of, a cheater. I decided to call Penny without expecting her to call me. "Hi, darling, I can't talk for long," she began, igniting a hint of irritation in me. I pushed it aside. Anger wouldn't help. "I know you're always busy, but I need you to make time for me." "I'll be brief." I heard her impatient sigh and suppressed my frustration. "Penny, let me be direct. You've become distant. Our calls are dwindling, and even when we do talk, you act as if I'm bothering you. You disregard my feelings and needs. It's as if you've forgotten there are 2 people in our marriage. Yes, I'm here to love, support, and encourage you, but I also deserve time and attention." If I hoped my words would resonate with her, I was mistaken. "Jesus Christ, Mike, what are you saying? I've spent my entire adult life prioritizing our family, and now it's my turn. You're making it sound like I didn't prioritize our family, like I didn't sacrifice or compromise for them. I gave up a lot in every way. I put you and the children first. So tell me, since you brought it up, when was it my turn?" "Because I think I missed it. I was probably too busy with work to notice myself too." Penny burst into tears. "How dare you suggest I didn't sacrifice for our family, you ignorant idiot." I tuned her out for about a minute, not wanting to absorb the insults I knew were coming. When she finally calmed down, I attempted to reason with her again. "Penny, our marriage is in trouble. Can't you see that? If things stay as they are, or God forbid worsen, we won't have a marriage left by the time you finish this course. Lord, I'm tired of your complaining and guilt-tripping. Grow up." I didn't bother listening to the rest of her rant. I hung up. Apparently it struck a chord because she immediately called back. "Look, I'm sorry, Mike, but you have to understand how important this is to me. I need it. Our marriage is fine." I didn't engage further. She wasn't listening. "Of course, I miss you terribly too, and I'm sorry you're struggling without me, but in the long run, this will benefit us. You'll see. We're halfway there already." After she passed out, forgetting once again to say she loved me, I grabbed my keys and headed to the pub. Maybe a cold beer would ease my disappointment. But halfway through my first glass, I realized I wasn't in the mood to socialize. I was hurt and angry, filled with anxiety, resentment, and disappointment. These emotions churned inside me like a washing machine. Not even Andrea's friendly smile could lift my spirits. I finished my drink hastily, said goodbye, and headed home. As soon as I walked in, I received a text message on my phone. "Are you okay? You seemed off today." "I'm worried. Call me if you need someone to talk to." I stared at the message, tears welling in my eyes. A woman I'd known for only 2 months cared more about my well-being than my wife of 28 years. Sitting on the couch, I realized I didn't know how to respond. For the first time since meeting Andrea, was I getting too close? Was I emotionally cheating? We'd never discussed Penny or the state of my marriage, and I hadn't shared anything embarrassing to admit this to my wife. I knew I needed to tread carefully. "I'm okay, just had a rough day. See you Thursday if you're at the pub." "Take care, Mickey." I scrutinized the text before sending it, ensuring it sounded casual. Then I heated up leftovers and ate standing at the sink. Realizing Penny and I hadn't talked about my upcoming visit next weekend, since Penny hadn't mentioned anything, I decided to surprise her by booking a last-minute flight for next Friday. I couldn't wait another week to see her. I needed to be with her, to remind myself how much I loved her. Although the thought of Penny being unfaithful hadn't crossed my mind, I opted for the surprise visit. This way, she couldn't brush me off again. Finally, Friday arrived. Leaving work early, I headed straight to the airport. Everything went smoothly, and by 6 p.m., I stood at Penny's doorstep. Jenny, the housemate who'd answered Penny's calls earlier, let me in and explained Penny and their other housemate, Gail, hadn't returned from school yet. As I retrieved my phone from my pocket, Jenny waved, mentioning she'd call Penny, her expression tinged with concern. Before she could dial, the sound of keys rattling in the front door echoed through the house. Penny's face lit up with surprise when she saw me, exchanging a quick kiss before darting off to the bathroom. I found it odd that she took her phone along, but with Jenny hovering nearby, I didn't bring it up. Jenny and I engaged in an awkward conversation while waiting for Penny, who seemed to spend an unusually long time in the restroom. Finally emerging, rushing down the hall to her room, she urged me to continue chatting with Jenny. As Penny retreated, Jenny visibly relaxed, and our conversation grew more relaxed too. Despite the significant age gap, I no longer felt self-conscious about it. During our conversation, I observed Penny carrying a load of sheets to the laundry room and returning with fresh ones, prompting a smile from me. Was she trying to impress me, reminiscent of our early dating days? Once Penny deemed her room sufficiently tidy, she suggested we freshen up together before heading out. I found it odd that she opened the window, despite her aversion to the cold. After over 3 months apart, seeing Penny undressed under the shower, water cascading over her ample bosom, stirred intense desire in me. I proposed, but she teasingly suggested we wait until after dinner for dessert, citing her hunger. We managed to find a nice seafood restaurant Penny had recommended, where she chuckled at my quip about oysters not being aphrodisiacs. Reflecting on the surprise visit, I felt it was the right decision. We enjoyed ourselves with 2 bottles of fine Riesling. But one thing tarnished the evening: Penny's constant interruptions to read and respond to text messages. Despite hesitating to address it, given our teachings to our children about rudeness, I decided to bring it up, risking spoiling the mood. "Oh, honey, you know I wouldn't normally do this, but I'm one of the older students, and some of the younger ones see me as a mentor. I need to stay connected," Penny explained between texts, even as she devoured her salmon. She then asked how long I planned to stay, mentioning she had tasks to complete over the weekend. I tried not to feel disheartened by her question, feeling like she was already planning to send me back home as soon as possible. Despite my desire to have alone time with Penny, I took my time at dinner, wooing her as if we were young lovers once more, rather than a seasoned married couple. By the time we walked hand in hand back to Penny's house, it was already 11. I noticed another car in the driveway belonging to Gail, Penny's housemate, who typically finished work around 10. The apartment lay in quiet darkness, with only the soft glow of the hallway light providing illumination as we entered. After dinner wine and our earlier shower, I felt a tension in the air. The time for gentle courtship seemed to have passed. Scooping up my wife in my arms, I carried her to the bedroom and gently placed her on the bed. Despite the 15 weeks of abstinence, I resisted the urge to take her roughly. There was an unfamiliar atmosphere that evening, a sense of distance between us. Our conversation during dinner and our walks had felt strained, as if we were no longer as connected as we had been just 4 months ago. The idea of taking her forcefully implied a familiarity that seemed lost. So, as Penny lay on the bed, slightly dazed from wine, I swiftly removed her underwear while she did the same with her top. Though initially confused, she soon relaxed, allowing me to undress her further. As we engaged in passionate closeness, Penny's reactions were markedly different from what I knew of her. Normally reserved, she now embraced the moment with abandon. It was a stark departure from her usual demeanor, which I attributed to her strict Catholic upbringing. But in that moment, she seemed liberated, unreservedly enjoying our connection. Her enthusiasm guided me, and I reveled in the rediscovered closeness. However, just as I teetered on the brink of losing control, an impatient knock shattered the moment. A female voice, unfamiliar to me, demanded entry, expressing frustration at our nocturnal activities. It was as if a bucket of ice water had been dumped over us. Suddenly, everything became clear: the shaved pubic area, the mysterious presence between us, the dwindling phone calls, the resistance to my visits, even her abrupt disappearances to the bathroom. It all made sense. As I gazed into Penny's eyes, I saw a mixture of horror and desperation. It dawned on me that she had been communicating with her lover, perhaps even during our dinner at the restaurant. Disgust washed over me as I beheld her disheveled appearance. She was no longer the woman I loved, but a betrayer, an adulteress. Instinctively, I knew I had to leave before my anger consumed me. Hurriedly dressing and gathering my belongings, I avoided looking at her, unable to. The sight of Penny seemed oblivious to the turmoil raging within me, continuing to hurl accusations as I made my exit. 6 months may be a long time, but her betrayal had shattered whatever remained of our trust. How many of them are married? They made me feel youthful and liberated, not like someone entering grandma's twilight years. Thanks for letting me know there's more than just good old Jake. We can get through this. Oh wait, we can't. As I fled, Penny's cries grew louder and more desperate. From behind the door, I heard a mounting sense of concern. Finally, suitcase in hand, boots untied, and without a backward glance, I swung open the door. She almost collided with me as she was pushed from the outside while I pulled her from within. In that moment, I found myself face to face with a young woman who I assumed was Gil. Over her shoulder, I glimpsed Jenny looking disheartened as I strode past my bewildered housemates toward the front door. I heard, "Who the hell are you?" before slamming the outer door. I replied over my shoulder, "Penny's ex-husband," emphasis on ex, and disappeared into the night. I had a flight to catch, a lawyer to meet, a marriage to dissolve, a sorrowful tale to share with family and friends, a broken heart to heal, and a honey blonde to get to know better. At the bar, I was startled when Mike answered the phone, half expecting it to go to voicemail like all the other calls I'd made over the past 4 days. "Hello, Penelope. What's happened?" I couldn't find words to speak, despite all my rehearsed thoughts. His tone threw me off. It wasn't one of heartbreak or fury, which I had anticipated. I wasn't prepared for his indifference. It felt like I was nothing more than an acquaintance. In the ensuing silence, his impatient sigh reverberated, causing panic to well up within me, fearing he might hang up. "Please, Penelope, make it quick. I don't have all day. I'm busy. It's quiz night today." "Quiz night? How could that take precedence over our marriage?" I blurted out before I could stop myself. "Obviously, Penelope, you don't understand how important this is to me. I need it." I winced as echoes of past conversations reverberated in my mind, feeling a surge of anger as Mike seemed to throw them back at me. "Please don't trivialize our marriage like that. We need to talk," but it seemed futile. He might as well have not spoken at all. "Listen, I have to go. The team relies on my history knowledge. I can't let them down. Let's talk later." Staring at my phone in disbelief, I felt the sour aftertaste of the wine I had drunk to steady my nerves before the call. Reflecting on my decision to stay rather than fly home immediately, I regretted giving Mike time to cool down. I shouldn't have hesitated. I should have chased after him, undressed if necessary. What held me back? Fear, nerves, guilt, shame all played a part to varying degrees. And, of course, the training course was also a significant factor. I had a crucial exam on Monday, and I was determined not to let 3 months of hard work go to waste, no matter what. While I had enjoyed myself during my time away, I had also put in a lot of effort and didn't want it to be for nothing. Over the weekend, I used the need to study for the exam as a distraction between my attempts to reach Mike. The exam took place yesterday, and I still hadn't booked a ticket home. Encountering Mike in our home somehow made the situation feel more real, as if the house belonged to him and the apartment to me. Though it seemed unlikely, I hoped he would return so we could talk on my terms. I rested my head in my hands. Facing reality was difficult. 4 days had passed and it was clear Mike wasn't coming back to confront me. I glanced at my phone and saw several messages from Jake, resisting the urge to open them, which was also challenging. The time on the screen indicated it was already 7 a.m. It was too late to ask the course coordinator for time off. I would have to wait until morning. I hoped I wouldn't need to explain in detail why I needed the time off. It would undoubtedly be awkward. Simply mentioning family matters should suffice. Putting my phone away, I wandered into the kitchen and peered into the pantry, feeling overwhelmed by the thought of preparing anything, especially since I had no appetite. I retreated to my room, lying on the bed and staring at the ceiling. Despite closing my eyes, sleep eluded me. My mind remained active. How could I make Mike understand that my absence was separate from him and us, running parallel rather than opposing? How could I convey that our marriage was never in jeopardy? I loved him, always had and always would. A surge of anger coursed through me. Curse men and their egos, curse pride. Yes, I had broken my wedding vows, but only physically. Emotionally and mentally, I was still devoted to Mike. How could I make him see that this was all that truly mattered? Not a mere physical lapse, but the enduring connection of heart and mind. While I had succumbed to temptation, just as this course promised financial benefits in the long run, my indiscretion would invigorate our bed life. Couldn't he see that? He would finally have the vibrant, uninhibited closeness he had long desired. I turned and noticed Mike's deodorant on the bedside table, left behind in his rush to leave. Leaning over, I picked it up and brought it to my face, the familiar scent bringing tears to my eyes. Closing them, I buried my face in the pillow, trying to erase the image of his shocked and pained expression. Hurting him was not my intention, but despite this, I felt deep regret for my actions. Clutching the deodorant to my chest, I tried to focus on the positives. None of our children had contacted us, and I hoped that Mike hadn't told them anything. He also hadn't yelled or insulted me, which should be a good sign, right? Sitting up, I entertained the worrying thought that Mike's silence might be due to him dealing with lawyers, changing locks, or emptying bank accounts to hurt me and our marriage. Jumping out of bed, I hurried to the living room where I left my laptop. Grabbing it, I returned to the room, my ears pounding as I waited for it to load. It felt like an eternity had passed. With trembling fingers, I logged into our bank account. Leaning on the pillows, tears streamed down my cheeks, but this time they were tears of relief. Mike hadn't touched the money. As I wiped my tears, I prepared to log out when a nagging voice warned me. Just because Mike hadn't emptied his accounts yet didn't mean he wouldn't. Wanting to protect myself, I transferred a small amount to an old account in my name, enough to cover expenses like plane tickets, taxis, and food. I intended to log out, but the small messenger icon showed messages for me. Despite my intentions, curiosity overcame me. Clicking on it, I saw messages from Jake, a gorgeous 25-year-old. More tears streamed down my cheeks, tears of disappointment and melancholy. Despite everything, at that moment, I longed to call him, to hear him tell me how hot I was again. I wanted to see his need for me in his face and body. Cursing the young man who started this, I remembered the first time I was taken advantage of after drinking too much while trying to fit in with younger classmates. But it was good, damn good. And then I couldn't stop. I wanted lust. I wanted to feel admired and desired, to be told again that I was the best woman in their life. I wanted to feel strong again. This power was absorbed. I was at war with myself, knowing that if I answered Jake's messages, he would come. I whimpered, the sound escaping me as I clenched my fist and pressed it to my lips. I should have resisted. If Mike found out about this, it could mean the end of my marriage. Rolling onto my stomach, I inadvertently knocked the laptop off the bed, causing it to crash to the floor. I didn't care. I cried over my loss, knowing there would be a price to pay. To save my marriage, I must never give in to my dependence again. Drifting off to sleep, I woke to sunlight streaming through the window. Feeling terrible, I trudged into the bathroom for a shower. Inserting my key into the lock, I turned it, relieved to find that Mike hadn't changed the locks. Another good sign. He hasn't touched the bank accounts, hasn't informed our kids, hasn't served me with divorce papers. It's Thursday, so he's had plenty of time to prepare them, and my keys still work. Mike will forgive me. It may take time, but he will forgive. Love fills me. Mike is a good person, the best, and he loves me. He will find a way to come to terms with this, and we will move on with our lives. We will both pay a price for this. Mike will always know that I found pleasure with another man, and I will have to never go out with him again. Trials of fidelity, of course. This is a high price, but it is worth paying. I opened the door, expecting to find the house in disarray. Mike's 3+ months of being alone were about to create a huge mess. I was wrong. Everything is clean, neat, at least in the living room. I went into the kitchen and dining room. It's the same there, spotlessly clean. He even wiped off the dust. Was he cleaning here in preparation for my return? If so, then this is another good sign. But where is he? It's 6:30. He should be home after work looking for his dinner. I went over to the stove and ran my hand over the burners. They were stone cold. I checked the refrigerator. It's fully stocked, including a plate of fried chicken and vegetables wrapped in plastic. Did he really cook something like that in the microwave for dinner? There are no dishes in the sink. Did he wash and dry them or decide to dine out? I thought about calling or texting him, but after our only conversation on Tuesday, I wasn't comfortable with what he might say. He definitely didn't come to pick me up at the airport, even though I sent him an SMS with flight information. Sighing, I filled the kettle, ready for a much-needed cup of tea. While I waited for it to boil, I pondered the conflicting signs Mike was giving me. On one hand, he did nothing that would suggest he's decided to end our marriage, but at the same time, he ignored my voicemails and text messages and didn't meet me at the airport. Maybe he's just being petty and wants to punish me. After making tea, I sat down at my usual spot at our table, looking at the table and the empty chair around it. I smiled, remembering the lively discussions and banter exchanged. We may not have been wealthy financially, but we certainly were rich in love and happiness. Those memories touched me. Mike will remember them too, and he's such a softie when it comes to kids. He wouldn't want them to have to choose or divide their time between us. For this reason alone, he will find a way to forgive me. But the question remains open. Where is he? Leaving the cup of tea on the table, I climbed the stairs and walked along the corridor to our room. Okay, he was at home. There was still a faint warmth in our bathroom. Once again, I was struck by the cleanliness. It's not that Mike was messy, but I assumed without me around, he might revert to typical guy behavior and not bother tidying up. Lost in thought, I returned to the dining room and sat, sipping tea. Where could he be? My stomach growled. I was hungry. I headed to the refrigerator. Could Mike have saved the chicken dinner for me? I lifted the corner of the wrap and took a sniff. It smelled delicious. I placed the plate in the microwave and sat back down, waiting for it to beep. The fact that I had no clue where my husband was bothered me. I replayed our conversations over the past 16 weeks. What did Mike say he did for fun? I couldn't recall much. Glancing around the room, I realized he doesn't usually spend his evenings at home. Anxiety crept into my stomach. Mike never used to go out for boys' sleepovers or weekend fishing trips. He's always been a family man. Has that changed during my absence? A vague memory of a name teased the edges of my consciousness. Something Mike mentioned in the early weeks of my course. Who was it? John, Jeremiah, Jason? I had a feeling it started with a J, but none of the options I came up with rang a bell. Then it hit me. Jeff. Jeff, whose last name I couldn't recall. I hurried to the sideboard where we kept an old notebook. It was ancient, from a time when we were too lazy to input numbers into our phones. Page after page, I scanned, searching for Jeff, and I found him unders. Well, Jeff Saunders, with another number scribbled beside it, so I assumed it was the same Jeff. I dialed the number into my phone. It rang a few times before going to voicemail. Frustrated, I thumped the table. Would nothing go right? The microwave beeped, reminding me I hadn't taken out the reheated leftovers. I'd completely forgotten about eating. I decided to enjoy my dinner while contemplating what to say when I reached Jeff. The meal turned out surprisingly tasty. Once things improved with Mike, I'd suggest he cook more often. Finishing the last bite, I took my plate and utensils to the sink. Now it was time for my second attempt to call Jeff, and I was nervous. What if Mike had already told him? Jeff was usually pretty straightforward. What if he confronted me? With a sigh, I resigned myself to it. Decision made, I checked my call log and hit redial for Jeff's number. He answered on the third ring. Hello. There was a hint of surprise in his greeting. Hi Jeff, this is Penny Granger. I was wondering if you knew where Mike was. There was a pause and I held my breath, hoping he wouldn't hang up. His silence allowed background noise to filter through. Hello Penny, long time no see. Yes. How are you doing and how's... I paused, struggling to recall Jeff's wife's name. Jane and the kids? Jane's fine, he replied, emphasizing his wife's name. I cringed. Now wasn't the time to mix up her name and potentially offend her husband. Everything's great with us and you? I sensed a shift in Jeff's tone. He knew. It got better. Is Mike with you? Yes, he's here. And where are you? At a darts competition. With partners. I gritted my teeth, suppressing a sarcastic remark. Jeff knew I wanted to know Mike's whereabouts. I asked twice, but it was clear he wasn't going to make it easy. Sounds nice. And where's that? At the pub. Which one? My local one. I closed my eyes. Clever guy. What's the name of your local pub? I asked, trying to stay cordial. The Royal. Not giving him the satisfaction of asking for his address, I thanked him and hung up. His parting words, dripping with sarcasm, infuriated me. Anything for the better half, Mike. A sarcastic idiot. I opened my browser and searched The Royal on Google. Turns out there were several: the Royal Hands, the Royal George, and the Royal Oak. It took me 10 more minutes to find out that the Royal Oak was hosting a couples darts event. I grabbed my bag, checking my hair and makeup in the hallway mirror. They needed some fixing. Frowning at my reflection, I rummaged through my bag for my makeup kit and fixed up. 5 minutes later, I was presentable and heading out the door. Tossing my bag into the passenger seat of my Toyota, I started the engine. As I waited for the garage door to open, I entered the Royal Oak's address into my GPS. Luckily, it wasn't far. My patience and nerves were already stretched. I was relieved to find the pub had its own parking lot, though there weren't many spots left. Couple darts must be popular. As I pondered this, a question arose. What was Mike doing at a couple's event? Just cheering on Jeff and Jane? I pushed aside my anxiety and approached the entrance. Following the noise, I entered a room with tables and dartboards against the far wall. The games were in full swing. Scanning the room, I spotted Mike on the left, focused on one of the dartboards. A blonde woman sat beside him, not paying attention to the game but watching the entrance, and she looked right at me. The expression on her face said it all. She knew. Warmth rose in my neck, spreading to my face. She lightly squeezed Mike's hand, and he turned, locking eyes with me. I don't know what I expected. Pain, anguish, fury. The gaze of a man who's endured sleepless nights. Whatever it was, I was disappointed. He looked unchanged. That's what made me freeze. My eyes were fixed on him, unable to look away. In my peripheral vision, I noticed the blonde woman squeeze his hand once more. My heart sank as I watched Mike cover her hand with his own, offering a reassuring pat. This gesture spoke of familiarity, friendship, and concern. Then Mike vanished behind his broad shoulders, shielded from prying eyes. A man stood in my personal space and I took a step back, only recognizing him when he spoke. Hello, Penny. Oh, Jeff. Hi, I stammered. I was looking for Mike. I understand, and, I want to thank you. Is everything okay with him? Well, I mean, I know he must have been upset after he returned from visiting me. I hope this didn't affect you and Jane too much. He was fine, even great. This puzzled me. Fine? Or great? How could he be okay after... I couldn't finish the sentence. After finding out that you've been cheating on him behind his back for the last 4 months, the heat in my cheeks intensified. They seemed to be on fire. Whether I was guilty or not, it was inappropriate of him to mention my indiscretion. I gave him a withering look, wishing I had the chance to turn him into a pile of ash. Jeff chuckled, fueling my anger. I clenched my fists. Yes, but it's none of your business. I highly doubt things are as great with Mike as you say. We've been married 28 years and he loves me. I know he must be devastated. He's just hiding it so as not to make you feel awkward and uncomfortable. That means he's a good actor. I had to agree. Glancing over Jeff's shoulder, I realized Mike was doing an excellent job of appearing unconcerned. He and the blonde stood by one of the dartboards, with Mike preparing to throw the first dart. It seemed his partner was a blonde. I didn't like it, not one bit. For all my dependence on men young enough to be my sons, I wasn't blind to their attributes. They were like mere sweets, light, sweet, and tasty, but ultimately unsatisfying as a meal. Like sugar, they lacked substance. Mike, on the other hand, was a premium steak, filling and best savored slowly to enjoy the flavor. Who is this woman? I disliked having to ask, but the need to know overrode my reluctance to show vulnerability. Jeff turned to glance at Mike and the blonde, then smiled. Oh, this is Andrea. Once again, Jeff was infuriating, answering only my direct question without offering any additional information. Is she here with anyone? She's married? Hoping to receive 2 answers by posing 2 questions, I persisted. Yes and no. I was weary and stressed, which made it even harder than usual for me to remain patient. So, yes, she is here with someone, but no, she's not married? The anxiety inside me intensified, and a part of me wished to avoid asking the next logical question. I was almost certain I wouldn't like the answer. Who is she here with? With Mike. Despite mentally preparing myself, I recoiled as if slapped. Well, that didn't take him long, I muttered, the pain overriding my verbal filter. On the contrary, Jeff's eyes bore into me like lasers. He had 4 months to get used to being alone. He glanced at Mike and the blonde, smiling. I think he took to it like a duck takes to water. His smile vanished as he looked at me, his tone cutting like a knife. But then again, so did you. It's been 8 years since Mike divorced me, and not a day goes by that I don't regret the actions that led to our separation. Of course, when it became clear that reconciliation was impossible, I was given the opportunity to indulge my dependence. But it was a hollow victory. It didn't take me long to realize that a constant sugar diet was ultimately unsatisfying, and the law of diminishing returns was at work. I spent 8 years chasing that elusive first high. If only I had realized then that I was doomed to fail. I try not to dwell on how my hobbies are getting shorter and shorter in duration. Even less do I want to think about other forbidden boundaries I crossed. I was once a reserved lover, afraid that if I showed too much pleasure, my husband would think less of me. I have now had more lovers than I can count on my fingers and toes, 3 times. I did things that I pray my children never find out about. My relationship with them is already fragile. Looking around the kitchen and dining room, I feel despair. Without Mike, these rooms feel empty. He brought warmth and laughter. Now they're silent, just rooms. I guess I should consider myself lucky that Mike agreed to sell me his share of the house for less than market value. Especially since I never returned to finish my course and remain a general nurse. But it's hard to feel happy knowing what lies behind his generosity. Andrea. Damn, Andrea was rich, and she wanted Mike, with or without money. I knew for sure they had set off on a trip around the world. Scotland, Venice, Florence, the Greek islands, all of it. I knew because they paid for all the children, hers and his, and the grandchildren to meet them in Hawaii in a few weeks. This meant I would spend Christmas alone again. I glanced at my watch. It's time to go to work. I packed my bag and headed to the front door. Out of habit, I looked at my reflection in the mirror and winced. I'm 56, and age is rapidly catching up with me. It's getting harder to attract young guys. In truth, the young guys aren't so young anymore. They're no longer 20, but 30 and even 40. I sighed in resignation. What else could I do? There are few men my age suitable for marriage, at least the good ones. And whether they're good or bad, no one wants to marry me. My reputation precedes me. The only option would be to move to the other side of the country and start over, but that would mean moving away from my children. And I don't see them enough anyway, not to mention an entire continent between us. While Mike and Andrea were probably kicking back and sipping Mai Tais, I went to change the bedding and put in the thermometers. I will end my days as a general nurse, destroying both my marriage and my career. And for what? For the taste of sugar. Sweet but bitter sugar. I blinked away tears of self-pity. Why cry? Nobody cares.
Wife cheated for fun and justified it, so I divorced her. Now she's desperately begging to come back. I, a 30-year-old male, and my wife, a 27-year-old female, have been married for 4 years now. We got married relatively young, at least she was pretty young, but it really felt right for both of us at the time. We dated for about a year and some change, and that was enough for us. We knew we were meant to be. Though with some recent developments, I'm not sure if we truly were. I have a pretty solid job. My brothers and I operate a jewelry business together. We built it out of nothing, and we've grown it to very profitable levels, which is something to be proud of. I know people say business with family can be very hard, but honestly, for us, it's been a dream. We've never been the kind of siblings to butt heads with each other constantly, so your mileage may definitely vary. On the other hand, my wife opened a cute cafe where people could come to get pastries, drink coffee, and read books. She's always been big on books, and is one of those people who proudly makes reading their personality. Those people annoyed the crap out of me before I met her, but yeah, I'm a hypocrite. Bite me. To be honest, I was pretty enthralled with the idea because I was trying to support her. So, I did her favors by helping her pay the rent on the place she's using for the cafe. It's pretty expensive because it's in a swankier part of town, but the business is getting profitable, at least without rent to worry about. And that was enough to put a smile on my face. Now, I think that's the background you need. Here's where the actual story starts. I can't remember exactly when, but I think it was about March when she came to me to tell me about this new man who showed up at the cafe. According to her, he was very handsome. I was a secure person, and I found that the two of us could objectively talk about someone's attractiveness without it becoming a big issue. However, there was something different about the way she kept going on about this guy. Supposedly, he seemed like the kind of masculine hero that she reads about in the kind of smut women like to read. Yes, she's into those kinds of books too, as all book talk type women seem to be, and I'll never get it because it seems to be the cheesiest form of romance that gets them going. Anyway, she went on for a bit about this guy before it ended, but I will admit that the words she chose when she spoke about him were almost like how she would talk about the cold Russian hitman who fell for some woman in the laundry room of their apartment building. No, I didn't make that up. That's from an actual book that she finds interesting. Now, that was it for the day, but she let me know that he came in the next day, and they spoke at length. According to her, he was from Serbia and used to work as a car dealer, but he decided to come to the United States in search of a better life. It was taking him some time to get back on his feet and get his bearings. But he was looking for work at dealerships nearby because that was the work he knew how to do best. I learned in about 10 minutes that he was tall, blonde, handsome, dressed well, and obviously spoke with an accent. Apparently, he loved to read books set in the Wild West, and was a big fan of fantasy like The Lord of the Rings. She always tells me a lot about her cafe's patrons, so it's not like this was out of the ordinary, but once again, there was really flowery verbiage at play, and it seemed like she was almost fetishizing him in a way. At a point, he wasn't novel to her anymore, so she stopped talking about him at length, but it felt a lot better to me knowing that he didn't seem to be worthy of long spiels every evening any longer. Hell, I even popped into her cafe one afternoon to bring her lunch, and I saw a guy sitting in the corner who fit the exact description. I was 100% sure it was him, and admittedly, he was a handsome guy. His name was Ivan, according to her. Now it's about at this point that things start to get a bit wild. There was a night when she got back home, and she had a goofy smile on her face, so I asked her what was up. She said Ivan had walked her home, and they had talked a lot about books on the way back. She admitted that he asked to take her out on a date, but she informed him that she was married and wouldn't be able to do that. She said he was really apologetic, held her hand tenderly, and then said goodnight and left. I remember asking her why that made her smile so widely, and her response was, "It's like something out of a book." I won't lie, that part pissed me off, because it was like she was romanticizing every single interaction she was having with Ivan. And I knew that because he was a patron of her cafe, there was no way they wouldn't keep interacting on almost a daily basis. I didn't want to seem insecure, and she could have decided to tell him that she didn't have a man, so again, I felt there was no need to talk about things, despite the fact that I felt some kind of way about it. It was just my feelings I had to get over, right? It eventually became evident to me that this wasn't the case when my wife came home about a week later with a bouquet of flowers that she promptly put into a vase. According to her, it was a gift from Ivan, nothing special. He said that he bought a bunch for a coworker. He has a job now, by the way, because it was her birthday. And he just thought it'd be nice to get her some because he always sees how hard she's working. I felt my head get hot as she said that because she was trying to paint the situation like she was a schoolgirl who didn't understand when someone liked her. I asked her straight up whether she could tell that Ivan really liked her. She said it was obvious, especially after he asked her out, but she believed the flowers were just a friendly thing. That had me baffled, because if you're a guy, you probably don't get flowers for a girl that rebuffed you, even if it was because she was married, as a friendly thing. He was still trying to get in her pants, or maybe now trying to get in her pants and leave all the rest of the lovey-dovey stuff out of it. He was having an easy time with his advances, so at the time, I knew he wasn't about to stop anytime soon. I was right because 2 days later, my wife came back home relatively later than usual, almost 2 hours late, and she didn't tell me she was going to be late. It's not like this was the first time in existence that she would come home late, so I gave her 2 calls, which weren't picked up, before deciding to give it time. But before I could call a 3rd time, she showed up at home in a distinctly bubbly mood. "You won't believe the evening I had," was the first thing out of her mouth before she went into a whole spiel about how she had shown Ivan where the museum was. And then they went to get a slice of American pizza, because he had never had it before and always saw it in the movies. Then they walked and talked and ate pizza and a bunch of other crap I really didn't care about, but I let her finish. And when she was done, I asked her, "Are you attracted to Ivan?" She acted very shocked and offended and said, "Of course I'm not. The only person I'm attracted to in that way is you." She said she was just trying to welcome somebody who was in an unfamiliar country and had no friends or close people around him to show him around and answer his questions. I wasn't really convinced by all of this, so I told her straight up that she had to stop seeing Ivan. Yeah, that caused a big fight, quite unsurprisingly. She talked about how I was being insecure, how there was nothing there, how I should stop feeling threatened, and a lot more nonsense. I was pissed, but I was able to keep my wits about me and stop my temper from raging. I stood my ground, though, and told her that she should stop anything extracurricular with Ivan. It was fair if he came by her cafe because he was a customer, but things weren't supposed to go beyond that point. I told her to imagine what she would do in my shoes if some Serbian girl came to buy a bracelet, and I started taking her walking around town and all that. According to her, she'd understand, but I think we all know that's a lie, don't we? Long story short, I slept on the couch. No one is shocked there. But the good thing is that I stopped hearing about Ivan and all his drama, which was enough for my mental health. Again, I knew that she would be interacting with him at her cafe, but there was only so much that could happen there. And it seemed pretty sure that nothing was going on because she was heading back home at the regular time each night, which was good by me. I became very suspicious when I walked into my wife's cafe randomly one afternoon, and she wasn't there. Neither was Ivan, though I couldn't have been sure that he would have been there at that time anyway, so that didn't mean much. But what did mean much was that she wasn't there, because that was very unusual. I thought of sticking around until she came back or asking one of her employees where she had gone, but I decided not to make a big deal of it. It was when I was getting back into my car from across the street that I saw her and Ivan coming up the street, arms interlocked. It took every single ounce of strength in me not to run across the street and beat the crap out of the guy and cuss her out, but somehow I stayed in the car, watched them walk into the cafe, and I drove off. That happened yesterday, and I've really struggled to process it. I wanted to confront her about it as soon as she got home, but I think there's a lot of power in knowing something that the other person doesn't know. You know? It'll make it easier for me to see through other lies that might be told. Case in point, when she got back home, I asked her how her day was. And she described a pretty plain day without any mention of going somewhere, I have no idea where, with Ivan. So, this is why I'm here. Should I confront her straight up, or should I try to find out more of the truth before that point? I'm tending toward the latter because I'm starting to think there might be something going on under my nose, and I feel like confronting her might result in all the chances of finding the truth dissolving. Let me know what you guys think, please. Your wife's coffee shop sounds adorable, a haven for book lovers and caffeine addicts alike. And then enter Ivan, the Serbian heartthrob straight out of a romance novel, tall, handsome, and with an accent thicker than a Russian novel. I mean, who wouldn't be intrigued by this real-life character? Your wife's enthusiastic descriptions of Ivan were almost romantic. I get it, we all have our literary crushes, but seeing her swoon over Ivan like he's Fabio on the cover of a bodice ripper might make anyone's blood boil, especially when she starts comparing him to her smutty book heroes. Ivan's charming advances and just a friendly gesture bouquet of flowers, right? Because nothing says platonic friendship like romantic flowers from a guy who's been rebuffed. I'm sure Ivan's next friendly gesture involves a candlelit dinner and a horse-drawn carriage, and the late-night walks, shared pizza, and giggly museum visits. It sounds like Ivan is checking off boxes on a rom-com date montage. Your wife's reaction, sparkling eyes and all, probably didn't help ease your concerns. Her insistence that there's nothing to worry about feels like those horror movie scenes where the clueless character says, "It's just the wind," right before getting axed. Update 1. Hey guys, it's me, the guy from that post about the wife with the cafe and the Serbian man. Well, I'm back with a pretty big update. Let's talk about it because I found a lot. It took me a bit to gain the courage, but I decided at a point that I had to find out the truth no matter what it would cost. I have never been the kind of person to smile upon the idea of checking your partner's phone, but in this case, I knew I had to put whatever moral conundrums I had aside and do it. So I did it at the first chance I got, which was while she was asleep. Unsurprisingly, she had Ivan in her messaging app and they had been talking a lot. It was WhatsApp, so it was easy for me to export the entire conversation to a text file, which I sent to my phone from her phone. I made sure to delete the evidence, of course. I looked through her gallery and found a few pictures of them smiling together in public places, but nothing extra incriminating. I sent those to my phone too. Again, evidence was deleted. That took me about 5 minutes to do all of that, and I put her phone back where it belonged. After that, I did all the reading on my phone, where it was a lot less suspicious in case she woke up suddenly. And boy, did I see things that made my head spin. Here's a transcript of one part of the conversation that you might find as appalling as I did. It came after a point where they were discussing some book that my wife had recommended to him. Let's call my wife Clarice instead of her actual name, Ivan. In a way, the main characters remind me of us. Clarice: yes, that's what I thought too. The big mysterious hunk and the artsy girl who was torn between him and her boyfriend. Ivan, and a lot of steamy sex scenes. That part especially reminds me of us. Clarice, I agree, the sex is always good, but in your case, it's a husband. Ivan? Clarice, yes, and I think that's what makes it even more exciting and fun. It feels so wrong. I've never cheated before, but I can't say I properly regret it. Ivan, it is wrong, but that's what makes it so hot. Clarice, yep, and I never want this to end. It drove me insane. It was 2 a.m., and I left the house to go on a walk because I couldn't stay behind her at that point. I would have done something crazy. I was almost sure of it. I feel like I walked around town aimlessly for 5 hours, but by the time I got back, it was only 3:10 a.m. She was still sleeping too. Do you know what it's like to find out you're being cheated on, but then to find out your wife is ridiculing you by actually enjoying doing everything behind your back? She was basically reveling in my ignorance of the situation, and that was the part that drove me over the edge, not that cheating was going to be forgiven anyway. When I got back, she was still sleeping, so I grabbed her phone, jumped to that part of her conversation with Ivan, and took a video of it on her phone. I needed to make it very clear that there was no doctoring going on here. It was clear that Clarice felt like she was living out one of her stupid books. But it was absolutely despicable that I had to be a victim in all of it. She has no idea that I know this, but the divorce is cooking up. There's really no other way for this to go. I also need to see her go down. I need to see Ivan go down too. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I need both of them to hurt, and I need them to hurt badly. Honestly, anyone in your shoes would have done the same. Reading that chat must have felt like being punched in the gut repeatedly. The whole reminds me of us and steamy sex scenes part, her reveling in the excitement of cheating. That's a special kind of betrayal. Kudos for keeping your cool and going for a walk. If it were me, I'd probably have ended up on the evening news, but you handled it like a pro. You even took a video of the chat for proof. Nicely done. Now you've got the smoking gun, so divorce is on the horizon, and honestly, that's the best route. Clarice clearly thinks she's living out some kind of torrid romance novel, but she's about to get a reality check. As for Ivan, I hope he enjoys his time in Fantasyland because you're about to drop a reality bomb on both of them. Update 2, it's been done, and it was glorious. This is the final saga of the Serbian man Ivan and the book-loving, treacherous, cheating wife Clarice. In this whole thing, they had no idea they should have been a lot more worried about me than they were. Let me rush through the boring parts of the story. Clarice went to work one day, and I parked across the street in an Uber. I watched as the process server walked into the cafe and handed her the divorce papers in a very public manner. That was very pleasing. After that, we drove off. I went to work, had a great day, and there wasn't a single message or missed call from Clarice by the end, which was very pleasing to me. She knew she had been found out, and there wasn't anything begging was going to do, at least, that's how I saw it. Well, that night, she came back crying rivers, snot pouring out of her nose. She looked like an absolute wreck. Honestly, I felt a twinge of sadness seeing her like that. Blame it on the fragments of love that were left. But it didn't last long. She kept asking what she did wrong. Was it Ivan? Was it Ivan? I realized she didn't know how much I knew. And she must have tried to figure out if she had leaks in her operation before she could figure out what I knew. I couldn't tell whether it was better to tell her I knew about Ivan or not, but in the end, I made a promise. I told her I saw her and Ivan walking arm in arm that day, and I had been holding it in. But I didn't let her in on anything else at that point. She suddenly got emboldened and started half begging, half calling me stupid. According to her, there was no reason to divorce her over that. Yes, she was wrong for still seeing him, but no, there was nothing happening between them, and I was being insecure. I was being jealous. She couldn't tell whether to grovel or insult me, apparently. In the end, I told her to get out of my house. Which she did. Fast forward to the actual divorce phase, that part was loads of fun for me. I have a lot more money than her, which in a divorce means there's a lot more to lose. But it also means there's a lot more to spend on good lawyers, which I made sure to do. When you get a divorce, get a good lawyer. I promise you all that it is worth it, because not only did I have a lot of pictures of the two of them after a point where I had mentioned my concerns about it, but I had the text messages to clearly demonstrate the infidelity. On top of that, my rock star of a lawyer was able to point out transactions in our joint account that seemed to have been spent on Ivan. He aligned dates on some transactions with dates in the entire text message transcript where he thanked her for certain things, and it became very clear that she was spending our money on her Serbian lover boy. The lawyer did a good job of painting her like a gold digger too, which was fun to watch for me. She fought her best, but honestly, there was nothing to point out for me. I am not a perfect guy, but I definitely don't have any divorce-worthy flaws. By the time the divorce was over, I really had everything I needed. I kept my house, I kept my car, and because of that pretty notable infidelity and the fact that I had set her up with a money-making venture, there was no alimony requested of me. Love you, Judge. She did get to keep the car that I bought for her. I didn't feel I needed to stress myself about that, and it made it easier to take what I took when she didn't leave the divorce entirely empty-handed. Now, this is my favorite part. It was hard for me to get back at Ivan. It was very hard, but one day, he was walking out of the cafe, and I followed him down the road and around the corner. I called his attention, introduced myself, and slugged him square in the jaw. It hurt like crazy, but I busted his lip and knocked him to the ground with it, and he looked very shocked. I wasn't looking for a street fight, but I would have taken one if it came. I think he realized he had no moral high ground on this one because he stood up and left after that. It felt good. I wish I could have done more because he knew he was messing with a married woman, but that was enough for me, and probably all I could have realistically gotten without a felony charge. And then, Clarice. You know that rent that I was paying for her? It was due again, and because she had her cafe in such a nice part of town, it was expensive. It was usually due on May 1st, but it was only toward the end of May that she came to me crying on the phone, saying that she needed to pay the rent for the cafe badly, and she didn't have the money for it. She begged and begged and begged, but I told her to sell the car to get the funds for it before I hung up the phone. She called several times throughout that week, but I didn't pick up the phone. Spoiler, I found out she sold the car when she called me to start cursing me out. She said it was evil that I couldn't help her at her very lowest. I told her it was evil to think that it was fun and exciting to cheat on me. She couldn't say anything to that. I'm waiting for May next year to see how she struggles with rent. If the gods have their way, she'll lose the cafe too, especially without access to my bookkeeper any longer. It's been sweet, honestly. I'm newly single, with a lot of money and a lot of satisfaction. I won't say that the divorce, betrayal, and infidelity didn't hurt like hell, because it did, but you can only move forward, right? That's what I'm going to do. Thanks to you all for sticking around and for your words of encouragement and advice. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, I'll never have to write a post again. See you. Clarice coming home crying and snotting everywhere? Priceless. I can almost picture her trying to toggle between groveling and calling you stupid. She really thought she could spin the arm-in-arm story into some harmless, friendly stroll like, oh no, honey. He's just my walking buddy, right? Because that's totally normal. And the divorce? You played that like a maestro, bringing in a rock star lawyer and nailing her with the evidence. Plus, those transactions aligning with her little love messages? That's courtroom gold. Watching her get painted as a gold digger must have been pure satisfaction. Keeping the house, the car, and avoiding alimony? That's the jackpot. And Clarice selling her car to pay rent? That's just poetic justice. Her calling you evil? Hilarious. She had no leg to stand on. Here's hoping she loses the cafe next year too. Karma's a relentless companion. So, here you are, newly single, loaded with cash, and a satisfying victory under your belt. Surely it hurt like hell, but you've come out on top. Hats off to you, and thanks for sharing this epic tale. What do you think of OP's revenge? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. And thank you for joining us today.
We eagerly waited for passengers at the airport's baggage area. My brother-in-law Bob, along with his 2 daughters, 9-year-old Danica and 7-year-old Louise, joined my son David, 12, and my daughter Sheila, 9. The kids proudly held up a big sign that read, "Welcome home, mommies." 2 weeks ago, my wife Mandy and her sister Helen took a vacation to the beaches of Belize, a perfect escape from the chilly Minnesota winters, especially in January. Finally, the passengers from the plane started emerging at the door, and the kids couldn't contain their excitement, bursting into cheers at the sight of their mothers. Both women looked stunning with their beautiful tans and smiles. Mandy warmly greeted David and Sheila, giving them tight hugs and kisses. Then she turned to me, rewarding me with a passionate kiss. I embraced her and didn't want to let go. "I really missed you, honey. Just wait until the evening," she whispered in my ear. "I'll show you how much I missed you." That night, she certainly lived up to her promise. After 15 years of marriage, she knows me well, especially my appreciation for tan lines. After putting the kids to bed, we headed straight to the bedroom. "Honey, Get into bed and be ready for me when I come out of the bathroom." In no time, I found myself waiting in bed. A few minutes later, Mandy emerged from the bathroom, wearing a bikini. Mandy's most attractive feature has always been her beautiful face, perfect for smiles. However, she's her own harshest critic, feeling she's too short or too thin. Both pregnancies had the side effect of making my chest larger and fuller. The thong bikini beautifully highlighted her curves, but the best was yet to come. Mandy stood at the foot of the bed, showcasing her golden tan from the beach. Slowly, she pulled down her thong, revealing faint tan lines where the straps were. The private area remained the same milky white as before. Excitement surged as she unbuttoned her bikini top, letting it hang over her chest. Finally, the bikini fell to the floor, revealing her cute little chest. I immediately crawled to the foot of the bed, grabbing her waist, and pulled her towards me, showering her with kisses and caresses. She responded eagerly, reaching her peak in just a few minutes. Several times, I simply enjoyed the musky scent of her body. She expressed how much she had missed me and shared that she found it sweet. She mentioned her gladness at being back home. We spent a good part of the night reconnecting. A few days later, during Mandy's bathtub cleaning, she playfully mentioned having been in the hallway enjoying the beautiful view. She giggled and approached me, teasingly pressing her body against mine. She explained that this was her way of teasing. Normally, I would press my hips down to increase contact, but a few seconds earlier, a feeling of fear overcame me. I didn't know why, but something was definitely wrong with the picture in front of me. However, I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Tired of my lack of response to her teasing, Mandy expressed dissatisfaction, mentioning that, like all men, I only used words and no actions. She made a final thrust of her hips, and then turned to grab the gloves from the sink, stating that she better finish the bath. It was then that I realized a small detail had struck my subconscious. I turned pale, left, and muttered that I was going to the garage, not caring if Mandy heard me. In the garage, I sat on a workbench, lost in my thoughts, having a bad feeling about what I had just discovered. I wondered if Mandy had cheated on me while she was in Belize. I was sure of one thing. If Mandy tried even a little, finding a willing man wouldn't be a problem for her. And what I saw made sense only if she tried something with her sister while on vacation. What will I do if I find out she cheated on me? The answer was clear. I'll leave her without a second thought, even though it will hurt, especially for our 2 children. Why did she do this to me? To us? Am I such a bad husband? These questions circled in my head for the rest of the evening. Despite strongly feeling she cheated, I had no evidence. How can I be sure? The deception, if it happened, occurred 3,000 miles away in another country. I can't confront her. She'll deny it. Can I stand up to her sister? I played with this idea, but the 2 sisters were equally stubborn. Throughout my life, I knew sisters. If one cheated, the other did too. I had to talk to Bob about my suspicions. Later on, I heard Mandy calling me, and I returned home. "What kept you in the garage for over 2 hours?" Mandy inquired. "Just doing a bit of cleaning," I replied casually. Then a thought struck me. I didn't want to share a bed with her. Anyway, I've caught a cold that hit me this morning. I think I'll sleep on the couch for a few days. Mandy didn't seem pleased. "All right, I'll make you some herbal tea before bed. Chamomile should help," she suggested. After Mandy went to bed, I found myself alone with my thoughts, jumping from one idea to another. Why did she do this? What should I do? Should I talk to Bob to find out if Helen cheated? At some point, I realized there was a foolproof way to find out if Mandy was cheating. She had developed a habit of staying in touch with all her friends and acquaintances. Mandy had around 600 or 700 friends on Facebook, and even more in her Yahoo address book. If she contacted someone in Belize, I'm sure they exchanged information via email to stay in touch. However, I wasn't sure if she would use her current email account since we knew each other's passwords. I fell asleep, and a plan began to form the next day. Exhausted and struggling to concentrate at work, I scheduled an appointment with a divorce lawyer on Friday. Then I called Bob, asking him to meet me for lunch. Surprised, he agreed, and I shared my discovery. Initially, he laughed, but I soon convinced him it was serious. He would investigate if Helen cheated on him. Pretending a bad flu, I left the office early and returned home at 3 p.m., I promptly installed keyboard tracking software on our home computer. It took a week before I discovered the truth. Mandy logged into another email account as Beach Dreams 1975, using our children's names and ages as the password. Just days after returning from Belize, she was in daily contact with Brad. The emails were explicit for both Mandy and Helen. Helen was involved with a guy named Steve. I forwarded all the emails and erased any traces of my surveillance. Then, I sent Bob the emails from my account. I learned they had been intimate almost from the first day in Belize, and even planned to meet again in Chicago next month. The girls would pretend to shop, while the two friends would pretend to watch the Chicago Blackhawks. A quick check of Mandy and Helen's Facebook pages revealed recent friends, Brad Simmons and Steve Reiner, both from Illinois, and both married. I had them in my hands. I had a challenging task ahead. Bob denied that Helen and Mandy were cheating, keeping my suspicions a secret. He never truly believed his wife would cheat on him, a sentiment I understood. Despite Mandy's loving behavior towards me and the children, it was hard to believe she would end the marriage. She seemed so caring and loving that I sometimes doubted myself. It helped. Needing to resume regular closeness, I called Bob at work. I greeted him as Jack and asked if he could log into his personal email account from work. He confirmed and inquired if I had sent him something. I told him to read all the letters and call me back. After waiting for half an hour, Bob exclaimed over the phone, expressing his shock and anger. I calmed him down, assuring him that I had a plan and needed his help. We couldn't let them know what we knew, and I shared my desire to hurt Mandy. Bob agreed to the plan and revealed his eagerness for revenge. I instructed him to call home, leave a message saying he would be working late, and meet me in a pub in the Old Town that evening. At our first strategy meeting, I suggested to Bob that embarrassment could be a powerful tool against our wives. Bob, initially silent, eventually agreed. I mentioned that Tom, our father-in-law, was particularly fond of his two daughters, and Bob nodded in agreement. I revealed that Tom had a strong aversion to cheating wives, explaining that his ex-wife, the mother of Mandy and Helen, had cheated on him throughout their marriage. Bob, with a sly smile, added that Tom hated cheating wives more than anything else. We decided to use this information to embarrass Mandy and Helen in front of their loved ones. I outlined my plan, explaining that we had only 2 weeks to act like caring husbands and advising Bob to follow my lead. I suggested he pretend to catch a cold, work late into the night, and be too sick or tired for bedroom activities, keeping closeness to once a week for appearances. That evening, I returned very late, pretending to have a terrible headache. Despite thinking about the revenge plan for a while, I soon fell asleep, aware of the impending betrayal. When Mandy mentioned a shopping trip to Chicago with Helen, I enthusiastically supported the idea. To show love and support, I even booked a hotel room using our joint credit card, reserved for Mr. and Miss Johnston, double occupancy, assuming Helen and Mandy would share. Bob offered to pay for the room, which was reserved for Mr. and Mr. Roche, also double occupancy. Both Bob and I arranged everything so that each woman thought we were renting one room, unaware that their lovers would be there. The girls planned to take Friday off, fly to Chicago in the morning, and return on a late flight from Chicago on Sunday. The following week, I spoke with Tom Raines, Mandy's father, sharing my plan for a surprise family reunion in Chicago with the kids. Since it was just 2 weeks after our 15th wedding anniversary, Tom thought it was a great idea. I asked Tom to book 3 rooms, thinking it would be a big surprise. Bob and I were outraged by our wives' behavior. On the morning we dropped them off at the airport, they acted like giddy schoolgirls on their way to their first date, laughing at nothing and everything, filled with nervous energy. At the security gate, we kissed them on the cheek, and they didn't notice that neither Bob nor I said, "I love you." Bob drove us back to town, and I quickly called the private detective I hired. I inquired if everything was in place for their stay in Chicago. The next morning, we all met at the airport. During the flight, Tom switched seats with my son David and sat next to me. Sensing something amiss, he asked what the problem was, noting that Bob and I looked like we were heading to a funeral. I apologized for keeping him in the dark and revealed the bad news about our wives cheating on him. I explained that a private investigator was collecting evidence for a divorce, and we would file it as soon as we caught them with their lovers. Tom expressed sorrow, putting his hand on my shoulder in a fatherly way. He mentioned how much it hurt and wished the few years they lived with him were enough to guide them. Tom began to cry, saying he didn't know he could suffer so much again. Having come to his senses, he stood up and returned to his place. Alan White greeted us at the Chicago airport and handed 2 envelopes, one for Bob and one for me. Inside were incriminating photos and a DVD of the previous night's events. He informed us that the process server would contact us soon, and his operative was monitoring the bedrooms. His assistant would notify us of the most compromising moment to confront the lovers. Simmons and Reiner's wives would receive similar packages by midday. We asked Tom and Alan to look after the children for a while, as we needed to assess the situation. My heart sank, seeing Mandy in various explicit positions, including a troubling photo with 2 mans. It seemed they had unprotected closeness, so Bob and I would need to get tested for STDs in Minneapolis. Alan called his assistant to check if the hotel was clear as the lovers were out for lunch. Tom ordered 3 numbers, and we requested an additional key card for rooms 201 and 203, registered in our names. Both key cards were issued after the clerk checked our IDs. We informed the receptionist that our children had planned a surprise to avoid alerting our wives. We all went up to the 3rd floor where our rooms were located. After an hour of waiting, Alan called, reporting that the lovers had returned from lunch and switched partners. Mandy was with Reiner, and Helen was with Simmons. Alan informed me that he was in the lobby, and the process server had just shown up. I turned off the phone and cheerfully told the children that it was time to go. Remember what I told you, Sheila? And you too, David. Grandpa and I will enter the room first, and when I give you the signal, you shout, "Surprise, Mom!" Understood? "No problem, Dad," said David. "And under no circumstances do you enter the room until I tell you to?" "Yes, that's right. We understand everything, Dad. Go." We walked up the stairs and stopped in front of room 201. I inserted the key and quietly opened the door. Tom and I went inside, the 2 children behind us. However, they didn't wait. As soon as the door opened, they shouted, "Surprise, Mom! We are here!" Caught off guard, Mandy had been with Reiner. Our appearance was indeed a surprise. Reiner hurriedly dressed and left the room. At least he reacted quickly. Mandy jumped out of bed, trying to gather herself. "No, no, this can't be true. No, what are you doing here?" she exclaimed. "Hey, Mommy's undressed," squeaked Sheila, squeezing herself between Tom and me. I snapped my finger, and the process server entered the room. "Mandy Johnston?" he asked the only undressed woman. "This is my mother," Sheila said, trying to be helpful. The process server handed her an envelope. "You've been served," he said, and took a photo of Mandy holding the envelope, attempting to hide her chest. He left. I urged the children to leave their mother while she got dressed. We exited the room, leaving Mandy crying on the floor, fully aware of the contents of the envelope. Bob and his children were in the hallway. I informed Bob that the situation with Helen had not gone well. Simmons had proven to be an aggressive type. When interrupted during his indiscretions, he reacted angrily. Tom got punched in the face. Without hesitation, Bob expressed his disappointment, punching Simmons immediately. Helen, in a commendable act, defended her father by scratching Simmons' face. I entered the room, removed Simmons, and tossed him into the bathroom away from the kids' view, along with his clothes. "Get dressed and get out of here, goat," I ordered. Tom, Bob, and the children left the room without any shame. Helen, covered only with a blanket, followed them. Her father instructed her sternly, "Go back to the room and get dressed." She complied like a little girl, walking back into the bedroom. The process server, who had fled during the argument, reappeared in the doorway. "Ellen DeRoche." "Yes," she responded. He handed her the envelope. "You're served." We all returned upstairs. The initial plan was to spend the night and talk to our wives one last time, but I wasn't in the mood to be in the same room with Mandy. I grabbed our luggage and informed the kids that we were going home. Tom expressed his desire to stay. He had a lot to tell his daughters. Bob and his children returned with us to Minneapolis 4 months later. Despite Mandy's numerous pleas for forgiveness, a judge reviewed our case and granted an uncontested divorce. The house was mine because I inherited it from my parents before I met Mandy. I also received primary custody of the children, but I did not ask. Tom ensured their well-being. Our assets were evenly divided, and Tom gave me a generous Christmas gift the following year to help me financially. He clarified that the money came from Mandy's future inheritance. Bob's divorce unfolded similarly, but their house was shared property. However, shortly after the divorce, Bob and Helen resumed dating, and I'm quite certain they'll end up back together. It's a shame. As for Mandy and me, there's no way I'll ever take her back. I somewhat believed her apologies and think she still loves me. My issue is that her betrayal completely crushed my love for her, leaving it in the dust of her betrayal on the beaches of Belize. I can't love her anymore, even for the sake of the kids. We're very polite to each other, but that's the extent of it. One day, while waiting for the children to join her, Mandy expressed curiosity about how I knew about the situation in Belize. I responded, attributing it to my love for tan lines. She seemed puzzled, stating that she was always in a bikini and we never visited a beach. I prompted her to think about her routine when cleaning the bathroom with various chemicals. She explained that she gathered everything she needed, put on plastic gloves, and rolled up her sleeves. I pointed out that she forgot one thing she always did first, taking off her rings, including her engagement and wedding rings, leaving no tan line on her finger. I've always believed that life can throw unexpected surprises your way. Sometimes they're good, and sometimes they leave a lasting impact. This is the story of one such surprise, a night that started well but ended in a way I never imagined. I'd been dating Jenna for a few months. We met at a friend's party and there was an instant connection. Jenna had this contagious laugh and a way of making everyone feel special. We had our differences, but they added spice to our relationship. Instead of causing problems, one evening we decided to go on a date. We began with dinner at La Bella, a cozy Italian restaurant downtown. The atmosphere was perfect, the food delicious, and the conversation flowed easily. As the night went on, Jenna suggested we go to Murphy's Dive, a local bar where our friends and co-workers often hung out. I thought it was a great idea. What better way to end the evening than with good company and a few drinks? Murphy's was lively when we arrived, with familiar conversations, laughter, and clinking glasses. We mingled, chatted with friends, and everything seemed perfect. A couple of hours later, I excused myself to use the restroom. As I entered, I noticed familiar shoes under a stall. I paused, trying to place them, when I heard a voice that sent chills down my spine. It was unmistakably one of my co-workers saying, "Do that thing." My heart raced as I pieced together the puzzle. Those were Jenna's shoes. A whirlwind of emotions hit me: anger, betrayal, shock. Without a second thought, I headed straight to the bar, asked the bartender to split our check, paid for my drinks, and left Murphy's without waiting for Jenna. I drove around aimlessly, trying to process what had happened. I ended up at a 24-hour diner, ordering a black coffee and staring into it, the bitter taste matching my mood. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I crashed at my buddy Mike's place. He's the kind of friend who doesn't ask questions when you show up. He just handed me a beer, and we played video games until dawn the next day. My phone was blowing up. Jenna had texted a dozen times, and there were a few missed calls. She apologized, said it was a mistake, that she was drunk, but honestly, it all sounded like noise to me. I took a few days off work, unable to face my coworker or the office gossip that was sure to follow. Mike and I hung out, binge-watched shows, and ordered way too much takeout. It was a good distraction. A week later, I finally met up with Jenna. We sat in a park, and she cried a lot. She said it meant nothing, that she regretted it instantly. I just felt numb. I told her I needed space to think. Part of me thinks maybe it was just a one-time mistake, but another part wonders if I can ever trust her again. What would you do?
I messed up big time. I wrote a post in subreddit about wanting an open relationship, and my husband found out, leading to a huge fight with hurtful words. Upset, I left home for a walk. A coworker, the man I wanted an open relationship with, called and invited me to his house. Frustrated, I decided to go along with it. So I asked him to pick me up, and we went back to his house, had drinks, and watched TV. Feeling frisky, I made a move, but it was disappointing. He ignored me, went back to the TV, and after an hour, he started straddling me. I went along with it, but the closeness was terrible. He refused to go down on me, citing a sore tongue from eating Pringles, so we went straight to bed, which was awkward. He forgot to pull out. Afterward, he went back to watching TV, and I went home. Reflecting on the walk back, I realized I just wanted excitement to escape routine. The reality of closeness outside my marriage didn't live up to expectations. My husband, with his experience, is far better. I was harsh in my last post, criticizing his size, but thinking it over, he's around 7 inches, not that small. I let a fantasy take over. When I got home, my husband was in the kitchen, unresponsive. He cooked pasta, didn't share, and went to sleep in the living room after tossing a towel at me. I fell back asleep after finding a rug. I tried talking to him on the couch, but he ignored me. I woke up early due to the cold since the heater in my room was off. This gave me more time to think, and I realized I messed up and need to be a better wife. I attempted to talk to my husband all day, but he remained unresponsive. When I made a move on him, he rejected me and left the room, something he had never done before. Even when tired, he'd at least go down on me. But today he seemed disinterested in everything. I hadn't noticed him eating or drinking anything all day. He just looked tired. When I tried sitting him down to talk, he got up and left the house. Calling him went to voicemail, so I texted him expressing my love and the need to talk for the sake of our marriage. He replied that he no longer wants a conversation or a marriage with me, planning to stay elsewhere until the new year. Upon his return, he expects me to be gone. He claimed ownership of the house, contacted a lawyer, and wants communication through her, not using his old number. I found out he's staying at my sister's house, and I'm worried she might make a move, as she's attractive and single. I texted her, but she said she loves me, but won't support me after what I did, suggesting we shouldn't talk for a while. I feel betrayed. I love my sister, but hate her for what she's doing. I hope my husband doesn't let her have her way. It's been a long day and I don't know what to feel or do. I just want things to be normal again. Sorry for the essay, I needed to vent. I messed up, but I never thought it would get this bad.
Growing up, I never imagined my life would turn out the way it has. As a young man, I was optimistic about the future, and when I met Jenna, I believed I'd found my lifelong partner. We built our relationship on shared dreams and experiences, eventually getting married with plans to start a family. But over time, the promises we made to each other started to fade, slowly revealing cracks beneath the surface. Looking back, it's hard to say when things really began to shift. Maybe it was after Carrie was born, our daughter, or so I thought. The innocence of our early days together gave way to growing distance and unspoken frustrations. I spent years trying to fix what seemed broken, hoping we could find our way back to the love we once had. But now, I realized those efforts were futile, built on illusions I hadn't even noticed. "I'm leaving," I said sharply, my patience worn thin. "Good. Don't bother coming back," my wife shot back, her words dripping with venom. Normally, I'd throw a quick insult over my shoulder as I left, something like, "Go to hell," but this time I couldn't bring myself to stoop that low. After 14 years of marriage filled with similar blowouts, something about this moment felt different. I always came back, no matter how nasty the argument had been. But not this time. This time was final. In a few days, she'd understand the full weight of my departure. Over the past several months, Jenna's words had grown crueler, sharper with each passing day. At first, I couldn't make sense of it, her growing hostility like an unwelcome storm. I found myself withdrawing, spending more and more time outside the house, avoiding her biting remarks. By the time I'd finally dragged myself home, sometimes after they'd already eaten, the leftovers were already in the trash. I had become invisible in my own home. My name is Kurt Kaminsky. Technically, it's David Kurt Kaminsky, but my father's name is David too, so they called me Kurt from the start to avoid confusion. No, I'm not a junior. My father's name is David John Kaminsky. Why he didn't make me a junior, I don't know. I wouldn't have minded being called Junior or even DJ, but instead it's Kurt or nothing. Yes, I'm Polish. Well, technically, I'm an American of Polish descent. Yes, I've heard all the jokes. Maybe not all of them, since they seem to come up with new ones every year. Being the only person of Polish descent I know, other than my father, in this small town of about 10,000 people, I've been the target of many jokes. Technically, I'm only half Polish. My mom's side is German, French, Irish, and English. But since my last name is Kaminsky, I'm a Pole. My wife, soon to be my ex-wife, wasn't who I thought she was. I found out just 4 weeks ago. As I mentioned, I'd been spending more and more time away from her because of her abusive behavior. After coming home without dinner several times, one Monday evening I decided to eat out. I was sitting in a booth, ready to order, when I overheard two guys talking in the booth next to mine. My ears perked up when I overheard someone mention the word Pole. I focused in on the conversation and heard one man ask, "So, how long have you been seeing Pola's wife?" The other man replied, "Since they got married. In fact, I slept with her on their wedding day, and he didn't know a thing," the first man continued. I didn't recognize the first man's voice, but the second man? That voice belonged to my best friend, George Carey. I was stunned. They kept talking, but I couldn't process anything else until George said, "Yeah, we meet up at least twice a month. Kurt's so obsessed with his cars he doesn't even notice. Idiot." Just then, the waitress came to take my order. I quietly said, "Sorry, I have to go." I left, walking away from their booth so they wouldn't see me. I couldn't believe it. My wife, Jenna, with my best friend. He was even the best man at our wedding. He's also my mechanic and will be for a while. Well, technically, he's not my mechanic. He's an independent contractor I use exclusively to repair all my cars. In case you haven't guessed, I own a used car dealership. Yes, I'm a used car salesman, I thought to myself. I've heard all the jokes and insults, but my business does well. People know they'll get a reliable car at a good price, and they know I stand behind my cars. If problems come up, I handle them. George had always been a solid mechanic, and I kept him busy and paid him well. I once asked him to work for me full-time, but he said, I wouldn't respect myself if I had a Pole as a boss. He said it like a joke, but I knew he was serious. Despite that, I hired him as my independent contractor. Though he wasn't very independent, my business was his only source of income. This fact will be his downfall. I left the restaurant and drove around, asking myself, could this be real, or was he just joking? I could have hired a private investigator, but if what George said was true, they only met twice a month. This could be a waste of money, I thought. But I could check Jenna's phone and email, and that's exactly what I decided to do. When I got home, Jenna was as irritable as ever, which was fine by me. I didn't want to talk to her until I had the truth. Once she fell asleep on her side of the bed, I got up and checked her email. Nothing suspicious turned up. Her phone was password protected, but it didn't take long for me to figure out that our daughter's birth date was the code. I scrolled through a few messages, some of which could be misinterpreted, but none were from George. His name was in her contacts, but that wasn't strange. He was my best friend, after all. Maybe he was just talking out of his A, I thought. Still, her recent behavior made me feel like something was definitely up. Maybe not with George, but maybe with someone else, I pondered. I went to bed, tossing and turning, trying to sleep. It must have been after 2:43 a.m. because that was the last time I saw on the clock before I finally drifted off. The next day at the dealership, George came by as usual and joked, "Hey, Kurt, what do you even know about Poland? I bet if I laid out a map, you couldn't even point to it." I laughed and added, "You joke that all Poles are dumb, but I bet they could find the U.S. and maybe even our state on a map. Why don't you get to work?" George looked surprised and didn't know what to say. He knew I was right. He couldn't point out Poland if his life depended on it. George was never the book-smart type. He was good-looking, had street smarts, and knew engines, but college wasn't in the cards for him. I figured that's why he hung out with me in high school. I helped him with homework so he could graduate. Now, I was starting to rethink my choice of friends. He made me rethink my choice of wife, too, I muttered as I headed into my office. I closed the door and started thinking about how to get proof of what might be going on. I can't just confront them, I thought. They'd only deny it. I needed evidence. I called a private investigator in Santa Fe and laid out my suspicions. "Well," the PI said, "since they only meet twice a month, it would be too expensive to keep surveillance constantly. You could put a tracker on your wife's phone. That way, you'll know where it is whenever you check. You could also install cameras at home, but unless they're top of the line, and by that I mean expensive, they'll probably get noticed. Even with good cameras, if your wife's sharp, she might sense something's off." "If I were you," the PI advised, "I'd start with a tracker and hope to catch them at a motel or somewhere like that." "Thanks for the advice," I said. "Send me info on a tracking app and I'll send you a check for your time." "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "You could find this stuff online." "Well, I appreciate the help," I said. "Expect a check soon. If you're ever in Silver City, stop by Kaminsky's parking lot and say hi." "I don't usually head that way, but if I do, I'll look you up," he said. I knew he was serious. One reason I was good at selling cars was that I made people feel valued. I learned early on that people need to feel like who they are and what they do matters. That's how you build trust in relationships. Later that night, after everyone was asleep, I downloaded the tracking app onto Jenna's phone and synced it with mine. It ran in the background, undetectable. That night, I slept better than I had in days. The next day at work, I checked the app now and then. Jenna worked part-time at the university bookstore, usually around 15 to 20 hours a week. She called the money she earned mad money and mostly spent it at the salon. Later, I checked the tracker again. She was at the grocery store. Then, she was home. George had been working all day, so nothing suspicious happened, at least for that day. That evening, I decided to be more pleasant to Jenna and our daughter. "Hey, you two want to go out to eat at Reveal?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Jenna seemed to react better than usual. Carrie, our 13-year-old daughter, wasn't too thrilled about hanging out with her parents. "I don't know, Dad," she mumbled. "Come on, Carrie. It'll be fun," I urged. Reluctantly, she got in the car and we headed to the restaurant. Dinner was nice enough, but I couldn't resist bringing George into the conversation. "So, I saw George at the shop today," I said, watching Jenna closely. She immediately looked away, then quickly changed the subject when she noticed me staring. My suspicions grew. Could what George said actually be true? I wondered, my mind racing. I needed to find out, one way or another. That night, I didn't check her phone again. I hadn't found anything suspicious in her calls or messages so far, so she was either deleting them right away or wasn't sending any at all. As I lay in bed, I turned to Jenna and said, "Thanks for coming to dinner. I really appreciated it." "Thanks, Kurt," she replied. "It was a nice surprise." Her tone softened as she added, "Maybe you'll get lucky tonight." It had been a while since she'd shown any interest in me. For the past few months, things hadn't been great between us. Jenna finished her nightly routine in the bathroom and came to bed, cuddling up next to me. I felt conflicted about the idea of having sex with her. If she's been cheating, do I really want this? I wondered. But until I had proof, I decided I wouldn't push her away. I wouldn't initiate anything, though. I'd let her take the lead. In the end, we did have sex, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, just vanilla, no need to elaborate. Afterward, I lay there, thinking. Throughout the week, I kept an eye on her phone, but nothing unusual appeared. By Saturday night, Jenna was asleep when I checked her phone again. No new messages from George or anyone else suspicious. I was close to convincing myself that George had been making things up to impress someone. He'd done that before, even back in school. I went back to bed, but something still didn't sit right with me. My subconscious wouldn't let me relax. At 2 a.m., wide awake and staring at the ceiling, I finally got up, went downstairs, and poured myself a Jack and Coke, hoping it would help me unwind. Sitting there with the drink in one hand and her phone in the other, I tried to piece everything together. Then, like a lightning bolt, it hit me. The password to Jenna's phone was our daughter's birth date. Carrie was born exactly 9 months after our wedding. A perfect wedding night baby. Or so I thought. What if George really had been with Jenna on our wedding day? I thought, my mind racing. There's a 50% chance Carrie isn't mine. My heart pounded as I went to the bathroom, grabbed a cotton swab, and quietly entered Carrie's room. She was fast asleep, snoring softly. I carefully swabbed the inside of her cheek and placed the sample in a plastic bag. Then I swabbed myself for comparison. If Carrie is my biological daughter, at least that'll put one doubt to rest, I thought. But if she's not, well, I'll cross that bridge when I get there. Sunday was for housework, and we each had our own tasks. I made sure to take my time, limiting my interaction with both Jenna and Carrie. I was struggling to keep my emotions in check, not wanting to give anything away before I had the results. The thought of what I'd done the night before, taking those DNA samples, haunted me all day. At one point, Jenna noticed and asked, "Kurt, is something bothering you?" I quickly came up with an excuse. "I'm thinking about buying a bunch of cars at the next auction. It'll tighten our finances for a bit until I sell some of them." "Well, don't overdo it," she replied with mild concern. She always said "we" when talking about the business, which was ironic because I had registered the company in my name alone. I didn't want our personal issues affecting the business or exposing us to unnecessary risks. "I'm thinking about paying off the credit cards and canceling all but one," I added, part of a plan to protect my finances. "It'll improve our credit." "Whatever you think is best," Jenna replied, not suspecting a thing. That idea, Paying off the credit cards and reducing any financial ties with Jenna came to me in a flash. It was a step to protect myself if my suspicions turned out to be true. Early Monday morning, I took the DNA samples to the university and found someone in the science department. They referred me to the department head, who assured me they had the resources to run the test. "We've got a strong program in cellular and molecular biology," he explained. "We'd be happy to help." I handed over the samples and a few business cards. "Anyone who works on this gets 10% off their next car purchase," I added, always thinking of the business. The department head smiled. "I've been thinking about upgrading my Camry. Maybe I'll check out your lot." "Whenever you're ready," I said, forcing a smile. I left the university weighed down by the possibilities of what the DNA results could reveal. This could be the end of my marriage, I thought. When I got home, I kept a neutral face and told Jenna, "I'm thinking about buying new cars to fill the lot." It wasn't a bad idea, even if it was just a cover for my stress. Later that day at work, I called Paul, my accountant, into my office. We discussed paying off the mortgage and buying more cars, going over the finances in detail. But my mind kept drifting to the DNA test. What if Carrie wasn't my daughter? The next 2 days dragged on like an eternity. I was barely functioning, on edge the entire time. Finally, on Wednesday evening, the call came from the department head. "I have the results," he said. "I'll meet you at my office," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. When he arrived, I could tell from his expression that the news wasn't good. He handed me the results in a manila envelope and said, "The two samples aren't related." I nodded, even though deep down I already knew what the result would be. It still hit me like a punch to the gut. The department head gave me a moment to collect myself before asking, "So, what car are you thinking of upgrading to?" "I need to get a sports car for a client," I said, trying to stay businesslike. "Maybe a Mazda Miata. I'll see what's at the auction tomorrow." He thanked me, and as he left, I knew I had to get out of the office too. "I'm heading out early," I told my assistant. "If you need me, I'll be just a call away." I got in my car and drove around the city, my mind racing. Everything seemed different now. My marriage, my family, my entire life. I need to call my lawyer, I thought. George had to pay for this, and so did Jenna. They had both betrayed me in the worst possible way. Before doing anything drastic, I pulled into a restaurant to think. As I ate a small meal, I wondered, have I really wasted the last 15 years? I don't even have a biological child from this marriage. What should I do next? I knew I couldn't pretend I didn't know. Of course, I had suspicions before, but now that I had confirmation, there was no turning back. One thing was certain. George would pay. I didn't care that he had been my best friend for years. With friends like him, I didn't need enemies. Jenna would pay too. I wondered if she even knew Carrie wasn't mine. Even if she didn't, she had hidden the fact that she'd slept with my best man on our wedding day. My best friend. I had no reason to doubt what I'd overheard. She had been seeing him at least twice a month. My anger flared, and I knew I needed to be alone before I lost control. I knew I should have called Jenna to let her know I wouldn't be home that evening. There was no way I could go back. I was too angry, and I might do something that would get me arrested. So I dialed her number. "Hello, Kurt," she answered. "Hey, I'm staying in Albuquerque tonight so I can be ready for the auction at 8 in the morning, I said, trying to sound calm. "Oh, fine. Bon voyage," she replied curtly. It wasn't normal for me to go to Albuquerque for auctions, so this was unusual. I wondered if she'd take advantage of the fact I'd be gone all night. She'd have to explain Carrie's absence to my parents, which wouldn't be easy. I planned to check her phone tracker throughout the night to see if she decided to go anywhere. I followed the road to Albuquerque, focused on buying at least 20 cars, including a Mazda Miata. I'd arranged for them to be sent to my lot after the auction, but the question in my head was who I could trust for mechanical inspections. George wouldn't get any more work from me once his current repairs were done. When he hears I bought 24 cars, I thought, he'll see dollar signs thinking about how much he can charge me. But that wouldn't happen, and I'd keep it quiet until the last moment. I planned to ask a local auction dealer to recommend someone reliable to inspect the cars before shipping them to my small town. I arrived in Albuquerque around 9 a.m. and checked into a Best Western. Even as the owner, I couldn't justify using company funds for an expensive hotel. The room was comfortable and the bed was decent. That's all I needed. I'm a simple person with simple needs. Once in the room, I immediately checked Jenna's phone tracker. She was still at home, or at least her phone was. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I kept thinking about why she did what she did. How could she justify sleeping with him on our wedding day, let alone seeing him twice a month for years. I began to question our entire marriage. It was never perfect, but I thought we loved each other. Now I realized the mistake started from the beginning. In the early years after the wedding, things were tough. We didn't expect to have a baby right away. We originally planned to wait 3 or 4 years before starting a family. We'd agreed on 3 kids before the wedding, but Carrie's arrival changed everything. Finding out my best friend had ruined those plans made the struggles of the last 14 years seem meaningless. There had been good times, but even those were now overshadowed by this revelation. If Jenna hadn't slept with George, maybe she would have had a child with me. Maybe she wouldn't have had such a hard pregnancy and a difficult child that made her not want any more. George destroyed my life when he seduced my wife on our wedding day. Now he enjoys her company twice a month, probably laughing at me all the while. He must pay. I thought about this as I lay down trying to sleep. Anger rose again. I needed to calm down or I wouldn't get any rest. I turned on the TV to a mindless comedy. The laughter helped me relax, and by 11 I was ready to fall asleep. The auction went well. I got great cars at great prices and met some dealers from the Albuquerque area. There were no Miatas at the auction, so I asked around. 2 dealers had one each, one red and one black. I told them I'd make a deal once I knew which color my client wanted. "Of course," they both said. "Just let us know what cars you have and we'll figure something out." I realized I should attend this auction more often. Talking to other businessmen inspired me to expand my business. Plus, it kept my mind off my problems. Later that afternoon, I met with a lawyer. The news wasn't good. I would lose half my property and have to pay alimony and child support for a child that wasn't even mine. I decided then that I wouldn't get a divorce. Instead, I would leave her with George's baby. I'd pay off the mortgage on the house and she could stay there. But since the mortgage was in my name only, she wouldn't be able to sell it. If I moved out but kept paying the taxes and utilities, she couldn't claim abandonment and take everything. I had to figure out what to do about my business. It was set up as a corporation, but if I didn't protect it, I might lose everything. I needed to speak with my business lawyer. When I got home that evening, I was exhausted from the long day. "I'm tired," I told Jenna. "I'm going to take a shower and head straight to bed," and I made my way to the bedroom. "Do you want dinner?" she called after me. "No, I had a late lunch," I replied. At least she thought to ask. The shower felt amazing, like my problems were washing away. While I still had issues to deal with, I was on my way to solving them. I fell asleep almost as soon as my head hit the pillow. The past week had been stressful, but now that I had a plan in place, my mind could finally rest. I woke up early, feeling refreshed, and headed to the office before Jenna and Carrie even got up. I had a lot to do and more plans to set in motion. When my staff started arriving, they found me deep into spreadsheets, financial reports, and sales forecasts. I told Paul I had purchased 23 cars and that we'd close the deal with the dealership in Albuquerque within a week. I also told Anna not to assign any more work to George, but to keep it quiet. She gave me a puzzled look. "You're the boss," she said. "Thanks, Anna. You're irreplaceable," I replied. At 9 a.m., I called my business lawyer to ask for advice about the company. "Well, your business is registered, but she could still force you to sell it for half its value," he explained. "Have you thought about selling it ahead of time?" "No, I haven't." "Should I?" I asked, unsure. "That would keep it out of her reach," he said. "This business is my life. I can't just get rid of it," I told him firmly. "All right, let me think it over and review the situation. I'll get back to you by the end of the week," he assured me. This news was a blow. I had worked so hard to build the business into what it was. It felt like my child. Unlike Carrie, I thought bitterly. Anger rose up again, but I had to stay focused. Being a good business person meant putting personal problems aside and dealing with business. First on my list was calling Doug, the department chair who had shown interest in the Miatas. "Doug, it's Kurt Kaminsky. I've got info on 2 Miatas, one red, one black. Still interested?" "Yes, if the price is right," he replied. "Which color are you leaning toward?" Doug's contact asked. "I can bring one by for you to check out and we can discuss the numbers. Even if we don't settle on a price, I can sell it easily." "Which one do you suggest?" Doug replied. "Well, each has its pros and cons. The red is bold, but it fades faster. The black looks sleek, but it heats up quickly in our climate." "Will you be keeping it in a garage?" the contact asked. "Yes, I can do that," Doug confirmed. "Then red's a good choice since it won't be in the sun much. I'd go with that unless you prefer black for its look." "Red sounds good. When can I see it?" "How about Monday or Tuesday?" his contact suggested. "Either works. Just call me when it's ready," Doug confirmed. Will do. I hung up and called the dealer with the red Miata to arrange a trade. He was interested in a BMW I had on the lot, one that had been sitting for 3 months. It would sell faster in a bigger city. By the time George arrived at the office, there were still several cars needing repair. As an independent contractor, he could come and go as he pleased, as long as the job got done. That suited me for now. He overheard the salesman talking about the 23 cars coming to the lot and poked his head into my office. "Hey, Kurt, when are those cars coming from the auction? I want to schedule the work for you." "The auction house is handling delivery. They'll be here sometime late next week or the week after," I said, struggling to remain calm. "Okay, I'll have Anna put me on the schedule," he replied. I chuckled to myself after he left. He had no idea what was coming. That weekend, I kept my distance from Jenna. I busied myself with yard work and running errands. I didn't even bother checking her phone tracker anymore. It didn't matter to me now. I felt nothing but contempt for her. The fact that I had been raising another man's child was unforgivable. On Monday, I returned to the car lot. I called the dealer in Albuquerque to arrange dropping off the Beamer and picking up the Miata. "Great," he said. "Let's grab lunch when you arrive." It was a perfect day for a drive, so I told Anna I'd be out all day. "Hold down the fort," I said. "Okay, boss," she replied with her usual enthusiasm. She really was irreplaceable. I made a mental note to give her a raise. The trip was enjoyable, as was lunch. The other dealer made me feel welcome, and I felt like I'd made a new friend. Driving back in the Miata, I had a great time. The top was down, the wind ruffling my hair, and I decided I'd call another dealer and get the black Miata too. I needed to enjoy life more, and I wasn't going to need more than a 2-seater anytime soon. When I pulled into the driveway in the red sports car, Jenna glanced out the window and must have said something to Carrie because they both came outside to watch. "Honey, why do you need this car? You know we need something with a back seat for Carrie," she said in a condescending tone. "I just picked it up from Albuquerque for a client. Thought you might want to go for a ride," I replied. "No, honey, I don't like small cars," Jenna said with a hint of contempt. "Carrie," I called, gesturing for her to come and sit down. "No, Dad, they already tease me enough about my last name. I don't want to be seen riding around with a Polish used car salesman." She said it with that teenage flair for disrespect. I was stunned. Where had this attitude come from? When I looked at Jenna, she acted like Carrie had done nothing wrong. Great. Now both women in my house disrespected me. "Well, I'm going for another drive. I'll be back when I'm back," I said, putting the car in reverse and driving away. I drove around the outskirts of Silver City, fuming. My marriage was falling apart fast. When I finally returned around 9:30, I went straight upstairs, took a shower, and got into bed. When I didn't come down after my shower, Jenna came into the room. The hallway light shone directly into my eyes, and I squinted and shut them. "What's wrong? Are your feelings hurt because we didn't like your sports car? Aren't you going to spend time with your family? You're not only Polish, you're acting like a child," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. Where was this attitude coming from? It had to be George. She'd spent time with him, and his low opinion of my heritage had clearly rubbed off on her. Now she was passing it on to Carrie, her daughter, not mine. I needed to remember that. I may have to support her, but she wasn't my child. "It seems like you and your daughter don't want to pull around, so you can both just screw off," I snapped, furious. Her attitude was making everything worse. She would regret treating me this way. From that moment on, the Kaminsky house became a cold and quiet place. The next day, Doug came by to check out the Miata, and he was thrilled. We went over the numbers, and he was surprised by the great price he got, $3,000 under Kelly Blue Book. As he finished up the paperwork, he said, "My best friend handles car purchases for the university. We replace about 16 cars every 2 years. It's not a huge order, but could you talk to him?" "I'd love to. You know, I'm always ready to make a deal," I said. "I'll ask Jim to call you by the end of the week," Doug replied. "That'd be great. Thanks," I said. That's how I'd built my business, by treating people right and showing them I valued their referrals. On Wednesday, my lawyer called. "Hey, Kurt, I think I found a solution to your potential problem. Can you come by this afternoon to discuss it?" "Absolutely. I'm eager to get things started. The atmosphere at home is getting unbearable." At the meeting, I listened to the plan and liked what I heard. It would take about 2 weeks to put into action, but it would be worth it if everything worked out. During those 2 weeks, I slowly moved my personal belongings and tools from the house to an apartment in a nearby city. Meanwhile, George was still anxiously waiting for the 24 cars to arrive, hoping for work he could bill me for. Every time he asked, I kept putting him off. That weekend, while Jenna and Carrie were out, I did some yard work and quietly cleaned out my closet and drawers. Since Jenna did laundry during the week, she wouldn't notice my clothes disappearing bit by bit. By Monday night, I was ready. I told her, I'm leaving. She started up with the same disrespectful tone, mocking me for being Polish and a used car salesman. In the past, I would have gone to a motel for a night or two, depending on how angry I was. But on Tuesday morning, after the blow-up, I arrived at the car lot early. As my employees came in, I asked them to meet me in the conference room. They thought it was just our usual weekly meeting. Good morning, I began. As you know, the cars I bought a couple of weeks ago arrived yesterday. They've already been inspected and are ready for sale. From now on, we won't be using George for any more work. If he asks, just tell him we've decided to go in a different direction and leave it at that. You've all been incredible. You're like family to me, which makes what I'm about to say very difficult. I paused and wiped a tear from my eye. I sold the business. Everyone looked shocked. I could see the surprise in their faces, but I continued. Nothing will change for you. Anna, you'll take on some of my responsibilities, and of course, you'll get a raise to reflect that. Everyone, despite their surprise, began congratulating Anna. They respected her and knew she deserved the promotion. Anna, after the meeting, come see me. We'll go over a few things. I'll still be around in an advisory role and might make the occasional sale, but I don't want to take away your sales. They were all relieved that I'd still be involved, at least part-time. As the meeting ended and we stepped out, George was waiting outside. Hey, why wasn't I included in the meeting? He asked, having attended most of the previous ones. Because it was a staff meeting and you're not an employee, I replied bluntly. He stammered, then said, I see the cars have arrived. I'll get started on them. No, they've already been inspected and prepped for sale. There's nothing for you to do, I said firmly. He looked shocked. But I always check your cars. What's going on, Kurt? George, I sold the business and the new owner wants to go in a different direction, I told him, barely containing my anger. I can't believe you sold it. What am I supposed to do now? Of course, it was all about him. Well, you can pick up your check for the work you did over the last 2 weeks. It wasn't much, as Anna had only used his services a few times. He had been waiting for those 23 cars to arrive, thinking he'd be busy. How wrong he was. I didn't feel sorry for him at all. In fact, I wished I could tell him to his face that he was a backstabbing traitor. Later, I met with Anna. Anna, can you keep this conversation confidential? I asked. Of course, Kurt. You know I won't say anything, she reassured me. Okay, here's the deal. I set up companies registered in Nevada. One owns the lot, and the other owns the business. I'm the sole shareholder of both. Eventually, I'll divorce Jenna, and I want to make sure she doesn't get the business. Why? Anna asked, looking confused. I've moved out of my house. Jenna doesn't know yet, but I'm not coming back. She had an affair with George. In fact, I'm pretty sure Carrie isn't my daughter. She's George's. I'm not even sure if Jenna or George knows. But they'll figure it out soon enough. I'm not filing for divorce yet, but I'll keep paying the utilities and taxes on the house so she can't claim abandonment and take everything. I've structured the company's sale so when the time comes, they'll be left to deal with it. By the time the divorce is finalized, the sale proceeds will be gone. I'll be making almost nothing from consulting or occasional sales. Anna, you'll handle the daily operations. I trust you completely. Anna smiled again when I explained the new structure. But when she heard about Jenna and George, her expression hardened. I truly respected her, and she always had my back. I continued, I have one more task for you. Order a new sign and letterhead. We're renaming the business. This will further convince George and Jenna that it's under new ownership. The new name is Helpless Car. She looked puzzled. Someday I'll explain why I picked that name. For now, just know it tells the whole story. Though confused, she trusted me and agreed to follow through. After saying a few words to the staff, I left the office and got into my Audi, driving toward Albuquerque. About 2 hours into the drive, my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Jenna. I hadn't expected her to call so soon. This had happened before. I'd leave for a few days. She'd call, we'd talk, and I'd return. Things would change for a bit, but we'd always fall back into the same routine. I decided to answer, curious about what she'd say. Hello? I said using the speakerphone. Kurt, what's going on? She asked hesitantly. Nothing. I'm driving to Albuquerque, I replied. Why are you going there? To pick up a car, I said flatly. So, what I heard isn't true, she asked. It hit me. George must have called her. She was calling to get the full story. I don't know, I said. What did you hear? George called me. He said you sold the business. Why would he call you? I asked, catching her off guard. She fumbled with her words. He's your best friend. He wondered if I knew what was going on, she said. Best friend? That was a joke. To him, I was just the clueless Pole who didn't realize what was happening behind his back. Apparently, my family was embarrassed that I was a used car salesman, I said. So, yes, I sold the business. Now you won't have to bear that burden anymore. Shouldn't we have discussed this first? She asked, worry evident in her voice. I could see how she might be concerned about how it would impact her life. But this was my company. I built it before we were married, and I had the right to sell it whenever I wanted. I just hoped the new owner would treat my former employees well. So, did you get a good price for it? She asked, her concern shifting toward her standard of living. I didn't care about that. I just knew I needed a change. After a few weeks off, I'd start looking for a new job. What about the mortgage? She pressed. Oh, I used the money to pay off the house. You don't have to worry about that now, I replied. You'll just need to cover the utilities and taxes. What about food, gas, and insurance? She asked, almost hysterical. Oh, I guess I'm just a stupid Pole, I replied sarcastically. I didn't think about that. Maybe you could pick up more hours at work. When are you coming home? She asked, desperation creeping into her tone. I'm not, I said calmly. What? I told you I was leaving that night and you told me not to come back. So I won't be coming back. Don't worry. I'll find a way to cover the utilities so the power doesn't get shut off. You can't do this, Kurt. You have to come back. No, I really don't, I replied flatly. Kurt, don't do this, she pleaded. I already have. What about your daughter? She asked, trying to guilt me. You mean Carrie? The girl who's ashamed of her last name and the fact that her dad is a used car salesman? Kurt, she's just 13. You can't take that to heart. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. I won't be coming back, so neither of you will have to be embarrassed by me again. I hung up and turned off my phone, letting her stew. I knew she'd be angry when I didn't pick up her calls. After calming down, I enjoyed the drive to Albuquerque, assuming her next call would be to her lover to share what I'd said. When I arrived, I turned my phone back on. 5 messages, 3 from Jenna, 1 from George, and 1 from Anna. I called Anna right away. Hey, Anna. Sorry, my phone was off. Avoiding some unwanted calls, I said. Yeah, I get it. Your wife's been calling me too. And George rang, asking if I knew where you were. I told them you don't come around here anymore. Is everything okay? She asked, sounding concerned. Thanks for covering for me. If they keep bothering you, just tell them you'll report it as maltreatment, I suggested. Kurt, you might feel like you're alone right now, but we're your family, she reminded me gently. Thanks, Anna. You always know the right thing to say. Your husband's a lucky man. Trust me, he knows, she replied with a laugh. After hanging up, I debated whether to call Jenna or George, but decided against it. Let them stew. I made my way to the parking lot office to meet the owner. I brought the Audi we discussed. Want to talk about a trade? I said as I handed over the keys. He inspected the car, clearly impressed. I could sell this in a week, easy. You sure you want to trade? Feels like I'm getting the better end of the deal. I'm not after the money, just want a sports car, I replied. Half an hour later, I was on the road in a convertible, heading north to Santa Fe. For the next 2 weeks, I traveled around northern New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. I kept in touch with Anna in case she needed me, but once I knew everything was settled, I headed west. Of course, they kept calling, first annoyed, then apologetic, and finally angry. I listened, but I didn't care. When they told me the credit card was canceled, I laughed. George even called, saying I was a terrible person for leaving Jenna. That made me laugh harder. I got a message from my lawyer saying Jenna had threatened legal action if I didn't reach out to her. I immediately called him back. Did Jenna really threaten you? I asked. Yes, but don't worry. As long as you're still paying for the house, she doesn't have a case, he assured me. I've got something better, a recording of her telling me not to come back, I said, feeling more confident. Perfect. Send it over to me. If she pushes any further, I'll use it against her, he replied. I spent the next few months driving across the Southwest, Reno, Lake Tahoe, the coast, Yosemite, San Diego, Vegas, just enjoying the road. The Miata wasn't the most comfortable, but it was fun. People, even some women, noticed me, but I wasn't interested. I was still married, complicated as that was. After 3 months and 8,000 miles, I returned to Silver City. At the dealership, everyone welcomed me back. Anna greeted me with a huge smile and a hug. We talked, and I suggested taking the team out for food and drinks. She agreed to close the store early. Later, I met with my lawyer. Jenna had tried to claim abandonment while I was gone, but he'd blocked her. We discussed the next steps. At 5, I met the team at Wrangler's for dinner. After about an hour and a half, people started leaving until it was just Anna and me. She looked at me and said, "Kurt, you're not helpless. You just trusted the wrong people." I smiled. "So, you figured it out?" "Yes, it took time, but I realized what you meant. All those jokes about you are insulting. You're so much more than that." "Thank you, Anna. You're the reason I came back. You didn't fill my shoes. You made your own." "I had a great mentor," she replied. We hugged, and she left to meet her husband. I returned to my apartment, which hadn't been aired out in 3 months. After opening some windows, I grabbed a beer and sat on the terrace. I thought about Jenna and how our dreams had disappeared. Around 8:30, I decided it was time to go to my house. Technically, it was still mine since I bought it before we married. The yard was overgrown, and the house looked neglected. When I knocked, Carrie answered, shocked to see me. "Dad," she stuttered, "is your mom home?" She called for Jenna, who came from the kitchen and screamed, "What are you doing here?" "Just traveling," I said calmly. Then George came out of the bedroom, wearing just underwear. "Ah, the whole family's here," I remarked dryly. Jenna looked confused, while Carrie seemed uncomfortable. "George moved in because we needed help after you left," Carrie said bitterly. "Well, you're misinformed," I responded. "George was never my employee, so I didn't fire him, and the bills are all paid." "What about food and gas?" Jenna shouted. "We've been struggling, Kurt." "You had a job. Wasn't that enough for groceries?" "So, you think you'll just move back in?" Jenna demanded. "No, I'll give you and George until the end of next month to find somewhere else. Take Carrie with you." Jenna, furious, snapped, "She's our daughter." I laughed bitterly. "Actually, Carrie isn't mine. She's George's." The room fell silent. Carrie looked stunned, and Jenna went pale. George stood there, speechless. I tossed them the DNA report. "See for yourselves." They read it, then collapsed into chairs, overwhelmed. I turned to Carrie. "Tell them they'll get divorce papers and an eviction notice next week. I'm done." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away. The whole time I'd been gone, I wondered if this affair had been happening throughout my entire marriage. Had she ever been faithful? Probably not. We met when she came in to buy a car, and George was working on it. I thought it was fate, but now it seemed like she'd already chosen George, even before we were married. I went back to my apartment and drank a beer, trying to clear my mind. The next morning, I went straight to my lawyer and asked him to begin the divorce and house sale process. I knew we'd have to sell the house and split the proceeds, but being nearly unemployed meant I wouldn't have to pay alimony or child support, especially since George was already involved. The betrayal was overwhelming. It would take me a long time to trust anyone again, whether it be a man or a woman. Maybe I needed to see a therapist. But for now, I went back to work at the dealership, not as the boss, but as a salesman. I told the team I only needed 1 sale a week to cover rent and groceries. That was enough for me. As for the court-ordered child support, I insisted on paying the bare minimum. As the divorce unfolded, Jenna hired a lawyer. I didn't know how she afforded one. Maybe the lawyer was working pro bono, but they didn't dig deeply into my finances. My lawyer had made sure everything was well protected. I heard from the team that while I was gone, George had come by almost daily trying to get a job from Anna. She had no trouble turning him down each time. Eventually, he gave up, and I heard the only job he could find was at Valvoline, doing quick oil changes for $13 an hour. I contacted a realtor and informed Jenna that the house was going on the market. She had already been served the eviction notice, so she would need to move out before the house was sold. One evening, there was a knock on my apartment door. Naturally, it was Jenna. "What do you need, Jenna?" I asked coldly as I opened the door. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "I don't think that's a good idea. We're in the middle of a lawsuit," I reminded her, keeping my distance. "Come on, Kurt, it's just me, no lawyers. Can't we sit and talk civilly?" she pleaded. I hesitated for a moment. "Fine, but let's go to Denny's. There'll be witnesses," I said, making it clear I didn't trust her completely. I didn't trust her enough to be alone with her. We sat down in a booth at Denny's, and after a few pleasantries, I asked, "Why, Jenna?" She looked at me, hesitated, and then said, "The simple answer is I liked both of you and couldn't decide." So you were dating both of us at the same time? I asked, trying to stay calm. She looked down at the table, ashamed. Yes, but George told me not to tell you because he knew it would ruin your relationship. He thought it would affect work. So, when I asked you to marry me, why did you say yes? I pressed. Because I loved you, she said, tears filling her eyes. And George? I asked, still pushing. I loved him too, but I knew he'd never be a suitable husband. When you asked me to marry you, she continued shakily, George and I agreed to end things. I wanted to focus on us and the wedding. So, on our wedding day while having sex with him, you said, I'm marrying Kurt, but you're still my man, I said, barely keeping my anger in check. Jenna broke down in tears. Everything was wrong, she sobbed. What was wrong, Jenna? I asked, trying to keep my cool. I didn't want to lose him, and he didn't want to lose me. I just didn't know how to let him go. Well, congratulations, now you two have each other. You even have your child together. By the way, great job with the name Kari, I added sarcastically. I didn't even realize it until I had time to think. Through her tears, Jenna said, Kurt, I didn't know. I didn't know Kari wasn't yours. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I had a lot of time to think on the road during those 3 months. I pieced things together. I paused, looking at her closely. So, Jenna, why are you here? What do you really want? She wiped her eyes and softened her voice. I wanted to tell you that I still love you, Kurt. I sighed, leaning back. It's nice to hear that, but I don't think you understand what love is. I loved you more than anything. I would have done anything for you, but you can't say the same, can you? She shook her head, crying harder. I did love you, Kurt. I did, but I made so many mistakes. I can't undo them. I believe you loved me, Jenna, but not the way I loved you. And now I don't love you anymore. I did, but now I only feel contempt. Her expression told me she finally realized our relationship was over for good. There will never be in us again, Jenna, I said quietly, but firmly. After a pause, I asked one last question. Have you and George ever really stopped seeing each other? I already knew the answer, but needed to hear it from her. She hesitated, biting her lip, and decided to be honest. We never really stopped. We had our lulls, but we'd still meet, usually twice a month. It hurt to hear her admit it, but strangely, I felt a sense of relief. At least she was finally being honest. I pressed on. One more thing. What happened about a year ago? Your attitude toward me changed so much. You became so cruel, Jenna. The contempt was obvious. Her face turned red with guilt. After a moment, she replied, George started pushing me to try new things. He wanted a ménage à trois, but not with you. He kept insisting on it, and it made me resent you, even though you had no idea. I know it sounds crazy, but I started resenting you for not being the kind of person who would ever agree to something like that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, did you go through with it? I asked, though I already knew the answer didn't really matter. No, she said, shaking her head. I thought about it, but I couldn't do it. And then you left, and everything just fell apart. Well, now you can do whatever you want, I said, standing up. I don't care anymore, Jenna. None of this matters to me now. I threw some money on the table to cover the bill. We're done here. We both knew it was over. As we walked to our cars, there was nothing left to say. 4 months later, we stood before a judge, and our divorce was finalized. George was there, waiting for Jenna. As I left the courthouse, he approached me. Kurt, he said awkwardly, maybe we can grab a drink. To settle things the old-fashioned way. I glanced at him, surprised by his audacity, but by then all the anger and animosity I'd felt toward him and Jenna had faded. They didn't matter to me anymore. I nodded. Sure, I said, why not? We had a drink, and as I sat there, I realized this would be the last time I'd ever have to deal with either of them. They could have each other. Let them live in the mess they'd created. As I left, I thought about how Jenna would now have to adjust to a lower standard of living. She and George wouldn't have it easy, but that wasn't my problem anymore. I was free. I might be a lot of things, Polish, a used car salesman, but one thing was certain. I had my dignity, and from now on, I was going to live life on my own terms.